Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Development Control Meeting B. I hope everybody had a good holiday break, and I hope the new year is fruitful for all of us. Don't want to wish you a happy new year, it might not be. So, welcome to the meeting. My name's Cathy Guthrie, I'm the chairman today. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it is safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential, exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. And welcome to you, Councillor Norris. We're still just in the introduction stage, so do come and join us and everything will be fine for continuing. The Council, members of the public and press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn it off when you've finished. So the introductions, that I always forget. First of all, we've got Ian Dupre, our legal officer.
Good morning.
We've got John Peyton-G, Senior Planning Manager. There's myself, of course. Then we've got Robert Carmichael, our Governance Officer. And then we've got Daniel Cameron. Why was I going to call you David Cameron? That's a bit of a slip and a faux pas. I do apologise. That's why I stopped. I do apologise. And then we've got Mandy, who's steering everything there. We also have other members of the Planning Committee who will present the cases, and we've had to move around a bit because, as you can see, unfortunately one of our overhead screens isn't working, so we have all the ward members who will be able to speak on behalf of their public, but they don't vote. And then we have some more members of the District Council up there, but most importantly are our members here, elected members, who will debate and make a decision. Your good selves in the chamber behind are made up of general public, applicants, agents, parish councillors, and those of you who have been invited to speak will have your 3 minutes with our electronic timer that's usually quite secure. So, without further ado, may we please move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We have one apology from Councillor Carter.
Thank you. And no substitutions. No. To receive any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest by members. No. Declarations of lobbying. Well, I have been lobbied on the last one, the Stradbroke and Laxfield, Newton's Farm. Is that the one you've all...
So is that all members?
That's all. Is that all members that have been lobbied on that? Yep. Thank you very much. Declarations of personal site visits. No. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of November 2019. And these are quite short, so there's page 1, 2, 3 and 4. And if you're happy for me to sign that, may I sign that during the meeting? Thank you very much indeed. To receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Now the planning applications, I have had a request, and so we'll be doing them in reverse order. So we'll be doing 7C will be number 1, which is the Newton's Farm, Stradbroke Road. Number 2 will be the land off Church Road, Old Newton. And number 3 will be the land to the west, the former bacon factory. Thank you very much indeed. So, without further ado, Daniel, if you'd like to tell us about the Brundish case. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Everything is as set out in the report for you members. The only thing I know in reviewing the report, within the representation set out at section B within the summary of consultations, I note that there are 7 general comments. Those should of course be 7 support comments as indicated below in that section of the report, members. Thank you. Right. If we go on to the presentation, is this one to move forward? Click it. Thank you. Here we are. Here's the application site, and I'll go ahead so we can start to get a better idea of where we are. In terms of, does that move there? Yes, it does. In terms of constraints, or identified constraints for our mapping members, we've got a public right-of-way here, coming up here to join up with Stradbroke Road, and then another one just at the bottom of the screen there, coming up to join with Stradbroke Road, but we have nothing on the site itself. If we take a wider view of the area, you can see how strongly rural and strongly agricultural the surrounding area is. If we zoom in a little bit here, we can see we have, again, defined agricultural field patterns. We have the site here, formed of an existing agricultural building. We then have a little run of linear ribbon development along here, fronting onto Stradbroke Road. We have further development up here as well. Following this road north about 1.2 miles, you get to Wilby, and then about 1.6 further up that road, you get to Stradbroke. In terms of the application before us, there's quite a planning history, so I just wanted to quickly run through that. We've had a few applications prior to 2015 for conversion of the site to provide for self-catering holiday lets. It was refused, and we also had a change of use from agricultural building to dwelling house, refused. We then move over 2015. We have an application for the repositioning of an existing rear vehicular access, which I'll come to in the photos. We have prior approval under Class Q to change the use of the agricultural building to form 2 dwelling houses. That was approved, and we have a further full planning application to convert the barn to provide 1 dwelling house. The key date in there for you members is 2015. That was when the government introduced a revised permitted development regime. So before that date, we had Class MBA, which is similar to Class Q, but did make allowance for sustainability criteria to be considered within the application. Then following that, in 2016, the Class Q application was approved because we were no longer able to give consideration to the sustainability of the location. I mentioned that in the report as well for you members when we discussed the fallback position. So coming forward, we have the site location plan, and we have before us a full application for the demolition of the existing barn and the erection of 5 residential dwellings on the site. We have 2 2-bed, 2 3-bed and 1 4-bed dwelling, all served by an access here onto Falls Green Road, and all arranged along the north of that access road, turning head at the end, and then the end unit served off that turning head. So we have development within this site, but unable to spread beyond. If we quickly run through the house types for you. We can come back to those if you have any specific questions, members. But I'll just run through the site photographs here. This is the access to the site, the access being approved under that 2016 application here. There is a query with our enforcement team at the moment as to whether that was implemented prior to that application becoming lapsed, or whether commencement was made before. I have information from the applicant to say that it was made before, and I'm going to invite them after the meeting to supply that to colleagues in enforcement so we can deal with that. You can see the barns in the background there, and then this is the northern edge of the site extending along this row of hedgerow. This is a view from the access back down Falls Green Road. It's a single track quite narrow without passing places, and it's unlit. The B1118 is at the end of that track. This is then from the same point of the access looking up Falls Green Road. Eventually this connects up to Wilby Lane in the north. Now if we come down to the B118 itself, courtesy of Google Maps, we have Falls Green Road immediately here, and we can see the view up the lane is sort of hampered somewhat by this curve in the road. And looking the other way, we've got a fairly straight stretch of road, but again there is a curve off here in the distance for you members. If we come looking down the B118 towards the junction at Falls Green Road, we obviously have that pink rendered farmhouse here on the corner, with the turn being made somewhere around this telegraph pole, and you can see from the turn it's difficult to see that junction there. And then if we come down the B118 and face up it north, we can see we have a fairly straight piece of road with the junction here for members there. We've consulted extensively with the Highways Authority on both the junction to the site from Falls Green Road and the junction from Falls Green Road onto the B1118. Highways are content with the detail shown in terms of the access onto Falls Green Road. They are of the opinion that it would be useful to seek improvement to Falls Green Road. However, this lies outside of land that the owner could control or influence, and there's not sufficient highways verge to implement any improvements there for them. They have examined this junction at Falls Green Road onto the B1118. There are no recorded injury accidents in the last 5 years, and they are content, although they do note that the visibility displays from this junction are substandard from what they would like to see.
Can I just stop you? People
Yeah.
are having difficulty hearing.
Sorry.
It's the sound system, so I've just been sent a message. I appreciate you can't hear very well.
Is that better?
Sorry. It's very difficult.
I'm getting a bit
Bit better.
poor.
Yeah. Sorry.
Apologies.
It's our sound
I'll try my best. Do you want me to go back and?
Just a little on the highways, I think.
Yeah. So in terms of the highways access, we've consulted with the Highway Authority on both the junction to Falls Green Road, which they are content with at the moment. The site enjoys agricultural access. They consider that the access of 5 dwellings onto that road would be a de-intensification of that use. With regards to the junction at Falls Green Road onto the B118, they're of the opinion that yes, it is substandard. They do note that there are alternative routes available to traffic at that point. It could turn left out of the site and continue up Falls Green Road to Wilby Lane. And while they note that the junction is substandard, they note that, again, it would be for them to seek improvements. The fact that there have been no recorded injury accidents at that site for the last 5 years supports that conclusion from them. If we come now into the site itself, we've got a view of the barns, and then a view towards the north. There was a pond in that area. It didn't particularly serve any ecology, but we can see from the submitted layout that it's proposed to re-implement that pond and try and connect it up using the existing hedgerows and strengthening those as well to try and create some wildlife corridors. If we come along here, we're at the bottom of the site now. I just wanted to draw your attention to this line of trees here, and I think it's better seen in the next image as well. Here, these are proposed to be retained within the site, although transposed to the edge of the site. So we'd be retaining those trees on the site, but moving them to provide greater privacy to neighbouring properties. And then this is a view beyond that hedge, so that post and rail fence would demark the end of the site with fresh planting coming up here. If we run back to the site location, site layout plan, sorry. Here we can see that as well. So we've got retained planting along here with some new planting denoted as well. We've got the reintroduction of the pond, and then we have the transposed planting here, the matured trees forming this barrier here, with then fresh planting up this end here. In looking at the application, members, I think if we're looking at a full planning application for this site, we'd probably be thinking, well, we have some social benefit in the provision of the housing, we have some economic benefit through the provision of construction jobs during the development of the site, but in terms of its location, in terms of its connectivity to surrounding sites, the connectivity is poor, members, to not mince words. We're 1.2 miles from the nearest primary school, we're 1.6 miles from that primary school on to Stradbroke, where you have a range of facilities. So we're talking about over 2 miles, 2.8 miles to the nearest facilities. I think in this location it's highly likely that, given the fact we have unlit rural roads, obviously being unlit is a character feature of a rural road, but we don't have pedestrian refuge and we have vegetation growing close up to the sides of the roads. I think it's unlikely that people would be willing to walk from this site to the nearest facilities. There is an argument to say that maybe cycling access could be made, but I think you probably have to be quite a confident cyclist. And I think really there'd be a predominance of car transport to and from the site to meet the needs of the residents. That being said, looking at the planning history and the fact that we have had a Class Q application approved on this site, it's now lapsed, but I think the fact is that we have previously been asked whether a Class Q barn conversion is acceptable on this site, and we have approved that. The full extent of Class Q could allow for up to 5 smaller dwellings to be provided within that site. Now, in terms of this application, it's obviously an extension over the 2018 application of 4 units. Compared to the Class Q, we've got an additional 3 units over and above the 2 already provided. We also have the Class Q dealt with some 380 square metres of floor space, and when we look at the 5 units now, we're looking at some 585 square metres of floor space being created. That being said, having regard to the fallback position of the applicant, we could be in a position where we could see the same quantum of development provided on this site. We could be dealing with the same impacts, and therefore the question we're being asked indirectly is whether we prefer to see development come on site and be restricted to the barn itself, or whether we prefer to see something a little bit more individual, a little bit more along the lines of what we have been shown. I think in the report, members, I've judged the balance and determined that probably the benefits of this scheme in terms of its design, in terms of the fact that we could be looking at the same impacts from the site, whether or not we were keen to approve this or not, and given the fact that we can control some aspects of the development as well here through imposition of conditions, has led me to a conclusion that my recommendation to you is that we approve subject to the conditions listed in the report. I'll turn the meeting over to the members now, and we'll have some questions if they have any.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much indeed. Before we just go on to questions for your good self, just to advise committee members that we do have a parish council representative, an objector, and the applicant, and of course the ward member, so some of your questions might be pertinent to them. So questions for the officer. Councillor Matheson and then Councillor Gould. Thank you,
Chair. There's 2 or 3 points to pick up. Have we had a late response from planning policy? That's on page 194. And also, I was struggling with the concept that a row of mature trees would be moved. That's paragraph 6.3 at page 201. So, I mean, are we actually talking about moving trees, or are we actually talking about grubbing them out and planting some saplings in there in a better place.
With regards to planning policy, I've had no comments from planning policy on this application, whether within the scope of the consultation period or late. With regards to the replanting, that is offered by the applicants as being, we will transpose the plants. And I think what we'd probably look to do is secure that within conditions such that if the plants then died within a period following completion, we'd be looking for like replacement. So even if it was a case of they had all failed following their translocation within the site, we'd be looking for specimens of a similar age, height, depth to go in and replace them. So it wouldn't be a case of we'd be allowing saplings there, because I think actually when we go through the photos, that line along the back there, you know, beyond that line, you're then into the rear gardens of the properties facing onto Stradbroke Road. So I think we'd be keen to see something on that corner that was sufficient to help mitigate those impacts.
How big are the trees they think they're going to move?
Is it better to go back to the images?
Yeah. Let's just go back to the
Back
images.
to the images. If we come back here, it's this planting here. So they are substantial, but they're not of such maturity and height that they're not going to be able to hopefully cope with the process. You know, you do see much larger, significant trees be transposed within sites, although it is quite an operation. I think these are probably of a size that they could cope with that.
Councillor Gould.
Thank you. Chair, I know this application for it doesn't necessarily rely upon it, but I appreciate being reminded of the purpose and provision of Class Q, please.
Yeah, of course. Class Q exists within that permitted development. So effectively, it speaks to the conversion of agricultural buildings to residential dwellings. It provides for a number of dwellings to be created within a given agricultural dwelling. I think the provisions talk about 3 large, if they're over 100 square metres in terms of their floor size, or 5 small if they're all individually under 100 square metres in terms of their floor space. Now, obviously, it's only the footprint of the barn that's allowed to be converted under Class Q. Similarly, we'd be looking for the physical limitations of the barn to be retained. We probably allow for some reasonably necessary works, introduction of doors, windows, potentially changing some materials, but by and large, we'd be looking at a building that was structurally sound and was able to carry on functioning in its same format after the residential conversion.
Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I've found my other one now. You haven't mentioned, and I wonder about what the relevance is, in the history, in the published papers, page 195, there's an agriculturally tied dwelling in 2007 with the occupancy restriction removed in this year. Where does that fit into the scheme of things?
Yeah. Just in terms of our planning history within the site, we have included things that have come forward to us as inquiries as well. So on the wider site, so part of this site used to be connected to agricultural dwellings facing out onto Stradbroke Road. It's now been separated from them.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, legal and senior planning officer are just saying just to disregard that for the purpose of our debates, please. Thank you. Councillor Warboys.
Just, it's again, it's sort of paragraphs relating to the sort of habitat and environment. It talks about the pond that's shown on slide 7 being relocated and improved. I just wondered where to. It's not shown.
Yeah, so there was an existing pond on the site. That was filled in. If we go to the site layout, I think, and apologies, I'll run back through. Photos. There we go. So that was in this position here, and then it is shown on the site layout, although the projection doesn't pick it up very well because it's quite a light blue. That's shown as being reintroduced here at the edge of this strip of hedgerow that would connect back down and around the site and then connect into others off the site.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we can move on now, we have a representative from the Parish Council, Mr. Anthony Bryant. If you'd like to come forward, please, and you will have 3 minutes, and when you get there, if you press the button on, and we'll hear your comments, please. Thank you.
All previous applications and approval for development at Newton's Farm have one thing in common, a roof height of 4 metres, and since nobody's property was overlooked, there were no objections. This cannot be said of this new development plan, as they are entirely different from the simple conversion of an existing building. The neighbouring properties to the site are a mixture of single, 1.5 and 2-storey dwellings with varying roof heights. The design of these new 2, possibly 3-storey houses is of a uniform, bland, generic style, typical found on new housing estates the length and breadth of Suffolk. The linear roof height of 8.2 metres is over twice the height of the existing piggery. This is inappropriate to the location and would unduly intrude upon the privacy of nearby dwellings as well as dominate the rural skyline. The height and pitch of the roof would make third-storey loft conversions possible, leading to even greater loss of privacy. The original Q brownfield boundary shown on site plan 4010/14 and 3614/13 has been increased by 30% by incorporating an area of undeveloped agricultural land. One of the proposed new houses were built in on this greenfield site. The original 385 square footprint has been increased by 52% to 585 square metres. Through manipulation of the planning process, it's possible that a precedent may be set, allowing owners of any Class Q site, however small, to demolish existing buildings and extend the site into open countryside to accommodate 5 houses. The impact of such actions are far-reaching, especially in parishes like Brundish, where there are former farm buildings on small plots. This could lead to uncontrolled development of otherwise protected rural areas. There are 2 Class Q developments in Brundish. The second development, a dairy farm, is a brick barn currently being converted into 3 dwellings. If this full planning permission is granted, it may well set a precedent allowing the dairy farm developer to apply for additional houses outside but adjoining the brownfield site. Furthermore, this would seem to encourage other farmers to follow Newton Farm's example and acknowledge they have a good chance of getting full planning permission to build 5 houses, even where the conversion of a farm building is not economically viable, as at Newton's Farm. Secondly, Newton Farm's full planning application may allow further development to take place on this site, and under similar circumstances on other sites, making local plans, development boundaries in mid-Suffolk largely redundant and irrelevant. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, do you have questions for Mr. Bryant? No? Thank you very much. If you could just press the button off, please, and return to your seat. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We now have an objector, Amy Finn. If you'd like to come forward, please. If you'd like to commence, thank you very much.
I represent the residents who object to this application. We are not against the development of this plot for housing. Previous applications to do so under Class Q conditions have gone through completely unopposed. But this application represents unnecessary overdevelopment, not in keeping with the area, which is unsustainable and will damage the environment and residents' enjoyment of it. This application is to build 5 very large houses, not only in the footprint of the pig shed site, but also on a green field. Despite being an agricultural site, the plan is to throw Class Q conditions out of the window with no justification. Yet viability has been proven by the existing planning consent being gained by potential buyers and a further offer. The pig sheds are low level and unobtrusive. The proposed new houses would have a floor area of over 500 square metres and be over 8 metres tall. They would dwarf existing neighbours. Brookdale Farm is a bungalow with views over open countryside. If these plans go ahead, there will be a gable end over twice the height of them, 5 metres from the boundary. There are no mature trees blocking their view, and this house will completely overshadow them. The proposed houses are not in keeping with any buildings or layout within the village. 7.3 states there will be harm to the quality of the rural landscape. All existing houses will be impacted by the light and noise pollution from 5 new family homes. We will all have our privacy encroached upon and views spoiled. Foles Green Road is a very quiet, unlit single lane with no passing places, regularly used by walkers. The Highways Agency view on acceptable impact is inconsistent. A previous application for 4 cottages was denied due to increased volume of traffic. They anticipate only 4 extra cars at peak time from 5 new houses. There will be at least 10 extra vehicles plus food deliveries and couriers. The plans show parking for 14 extra cars, yet they say this will be no increase. The report states the visibility of the turn onto the main road is not up to standard. They also recommend a visibility display of 90 metres. This is wrong, as both Foles Green and the B1 way are 60 mile an hour, requiring over 200 metres. We live in open countryside. We have no paths, no bus routes, nowhere safe for school buses to stop. We have no pub, shop or school, so living here means having a car. Highways themselves say this development is unsustainable. Car reliance is at odds with the MPPF and does not pass the environmental test, and yet all this is ignored. There will be no economic benefit to the area, just to the developer and estate agents. Work carried out so far has not been in line with consents, which raises concern over asbestos removal. 12.8 says that adverse impacts are outweighed by the benefits. We disagree and do not believe this point has been sufficiently proven to make it a better option than the existing permissions. 12.1 states this plan contravenes planning policies, but is not reason to refuse the application. Why not? If we don't have a current policy that restricts building developments on countryside, then the county is in trouble. We will appeal this if it goes through, because we think protecting the beauty of mid-Suffolk is important. We hope you do too, and invite you to come and have a look.
Thank you very much. So if you'd like to just stay there, the members might have a question for you. Yes, Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, could the officer put up a picture or something which would illustrate the height of the existing shed? I must say, as I read the papers, I had in my mind's eye a large, high, a high barn and not a pig shed. I think that the point is very striking from the objector regarding the height.
So that's really a comment rather than we've put that up for you, but we're on to questions at the moment. So any questions further for the lady? If you'd like to return to your seat. Thank you very much indeed. We now have Rupert Durrant, please, if you'd like to come forward. I'm not sure. Are you the agent, is it?
I'm the developer.
Developer, thank you.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, please may I confirm that the work on the site's new access was started on the 26th of March 2019 and therefore is not in breach of any planning permission, as is stated by some of the objectors. So far today, you have heard from the Senior Planning Officer, Mr. Cameron, who we have worked with closely for the last 11 months to develop this application. As he has stated, that this design will be a significant improvement on the existing planning approval. It maximises the use of the site, completes the settlement area, and will have beneficial impact on the local community. And that the planning department supports this application. You will hear, I believe, from Councillor Flatman and the other representatives who have presented the views of the parish council that they believe there are issues with design, density, traffic and local community needs. We have addressed each of these issues to the satisfaction of the planning department. And hopefully you will have been able to have a chance to read the short letter from Hollins, which outlines our disappointment at not being given an opportunity to engage with the parish council, highlights the fact that we have proactively made numerous amendments to negate issues with neighbours, as well as clarifying our belief in the sustainability of this site. I would also like to point out at this time that rather than build 3 larger houses, more profitable, we have chosen 5 smaller, mixed-size, lower-cost homes that actually reflect the needs of the local community, targeting young families and retired couples to bring into this shrinking community. It is these buyers who are more likely to engage in the community and put their children in the local schools. We have also tried to design these houses as environmentally responsible as possible by minimising the use of concrete, using larger cavity walls with more insulation, opting for eco-friendly windows and doors, installing electric car charging points, solar panels, air source heating, a single large treatment plant, and depending on costs, I hope to improve what we are now promising, or what we're promising now. Finally, the main reason I'm so driven to get this development approved is that my family and I currently live in a lovely house on the outskirts of Brundish, but it is rented. If you approve this design, it will allow me to build one of these houses for my family to have as our own home. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Do members have any questions? I have a question I've written down here, which may be relevant to the officer or yourself. You want one of these houses for yourself, you've just stated.
Yep.
Has there been a housing needs survey done locally?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can the officer advise whether we've had anything on there?
No,
and we'll come to the ward member when we get to it, so the needs of the local community. And you say it will have a positive impact on the community. Could you just sort of amplify on that, please?
I believe so. At the moment, Brundish is shrinking. It's got, in the consensus, it's dropped its sort of population by about 15-20%, I believe, in the last sort of 15-20 years, from the consensus we did research on. There'll be an impact for the 1.4 million development costs going into the community. It will bring in younger families and hopefully retired. That's who we're targeting with these houses, developing these houses specifically for those markets, to bring into the community. The schools are all, bar one, way below capacity. And we also believe the Section 106 will add value as well.
Okay, right, yeah, the usual sort of development requirements. And one other thing, a queue scheme would... were you involved in the previous queue development?
No, I've come to this having seen the site, looked at it,
right.
and I've been searching for a decent
right,
site.
Thank you. Right. Any further questions? No? Thank you for your time. So we now come to the ward member. Thank you very much indeed. And you can either stay where you are, councillor.
Thank you, Chair, members. You've heard quite a lot of information there. I'm not going to repeat everything. I'll just give you a sum up. Brundish PC and residents welcome development. In fact, every previous application on this site has been supported as a single-storey dwelling. A similar development was also supported and granted at Dairy Farm with 3 bungalows. We also supported the holiday lets on the Newton's Farm site because they would have been in keeping as well at that same height. So it's not the development that's the issue, it's the density of the development and the style. The build design does not sit well in the rural setting. This is a farmyard. So it's not that's the problem. The original footprint has been extended by 52%. This would not have been approved under permitted development rules. Also, the height of the build at present is single storey. The new application is certainly not, as you have heard from others. There has been no consultation with the parish and the village, which would, I'm sure, brought a site forward everyone could have supported. As the development mentioned about families and retirement, I mean, you're looking at starter homes being two to 3 beds and perhaps some bungalows in there. Planning officer states that the lack of similar sites means that approval of the proposal would not set a precedent. This is incorrect. Approval would justify demolition of agricultural building which may potentially satisfy permitted development requirements and replacement with 5 new houses with far greater spread, height and impact than the existing building. There are very, very many farmyards in our lovely district. If members are in any doubt over this site, I would request a site visit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Do members have a question of the ward member? No? I just have one question. It was mentioned, I mean, we've all seen the pictures of the lane and the B1118, I know it. Did somebody say there's no buses there anyway? None at all?
No buses.
No. Thank you. And no footpaths.
Can I just come back on the schools? The schools, we have a syndicate of schools, Stradbroke, Laxfield will be, and many, many other people from other villages use those schools, and we are at. Yeah.
Thank you. Right.
Chair, could I just add something? There was actually a request to buy the farm buildings under the Q permission, and it was turned down to renovate them as one dwelling.
So it's not, if members can disregard that, I'm afraid that's not a planning relevance in this debate. Thank you. Right, so we're off to our own debate, if you would, please. Who's going to start us off on this one? Councillor Humphrey, if I can rely on you.
Madam Chair, thank you. We need to be careful that we're not hoodwinked by the fallback position of the Class Q. The Class Q is irrelevant to this application. This application is for the building, full application for 5 new buildings in the countryside. The Class Q fallback, if this fails, they could go back to it, is for 1 or 2 residents that's actually been accepted on a previous planning permission. So please stay clear of the Class Q fallback at the moment. I will come back to it shortly. So with that in mind, this application, again, is not Class Q, sees the demolition of a current agricultural building. On the Class Q, they would have built within the frame of the agricultural building or within the square footage of it. As it's already been explained, quite well actually by the public speakers, that the actual building size was 380 metres. This application is 585 square metres, which is significantly larger, hugely larger, outside the frame of the current agricultural building, and again, takes up that whole area. So it's quite a substantial build in the countryside. And I'll take you to the countryside now. If we go to page 198, And we look at 3.13, the aim of the MPPF, and it talks about the three assessed areas. One of them is the environmental dimension. Criticism of the application notes the lack of facilities to support proposed dwellings. It's absolutely clear. That being said, it is well established industry practice that seal contributions are used to ensure existing infrastructure capacity is enhanced to accommodate additional demand. However, weight should be given to lack of facilities in the immediate area, and with the difficulty future residents of the site are like to have assessing them using sustainable transport options, which stinks straight away at the sustainability of the site for 5 properties in the countryside. We can go further than that. It talks then about the attention to Class Q, so to come back to it on 3.17. The former application, which is their fallback, was creation of 2 dwellings within the current agricultural building on the site, or on the one that's passed, 1 dwelling within the frame of the existing agricultural building. And as we said, this is massive compared with the former application and approval. Completely different to the Class Q. So again, we should really sort of ignore the Class Q side of it in this application. The key bit really for me is, and my pen ran out, so I'm going to shoot from the hip a little bit on this. Whilst I actually like the design, and I know people get off on this, it's just a modern design for Suffolk, blah, blah, blah. They are quite nice houses. And if I had the money, I'd buy something like that in the countryside, just 5 houses, really, really nice. But I'm not in that position, and that's not what my job is here today. My job today is to look at it factually and to look at the evidence in front of me. And at the end of the day, this is 5 large buildings built in the countryside in an unsustainable location, which is outside, I think, of CS1, is it, of our core strategies? So therefore it fails on that. And it talks about that actually within this planning document, the reasons why we should actually refuse this. Yeah, it's unsustainable and it's huge. I'm not going to make a decision yet, but I'm minded to refuse, mainly on sustainability. Over to anyone else.
I've got the wrong button. John just wanted to make a comment on something, but we're entitled to our debate.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that at all, Chairman. Just to urge a little caution in the wording, I would perhaps suggest that saying that Class Q, which is legislation under the General Permitted Development Order, is relevant as opposed to not relevant, but what weight you may apply to it is your discretion of judgment. I don't want to say any more than that.
Thank you. If I could come back. I'm saying the Class Q in this application is not relevant because it's not a Class Q application. But I do get your point. Their fallback is Class Q, which is relevant, and planning permission has been granted under that. But for 1 or 2 properties with the existing framework or size footprint of the agricultural building, this isn't for that.
Thanks for that. Councillor Matheson.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm also wanting to look at paragraph 316, environmental dimension of sustainability. And when I read that, I couldn't really actually see that there was any environmental benefit being offered in that paragraph. And as Councillor Humphreys has said, this is both an increase of height and of footprint. I'd be interested to just hear from officers what Class Q says about the height and footprint. You know, apart from that, we've now heard that the objectors don't really see this as an environmental improvement anyway. The perception's quite the reverse. And having, you know, got a bit more clarity about the height of the building, I must say I do rather agree with them that it is disproportionate in the extreme. And just related to that, on the existing approval under Class Q, is that effectively 2 bungalows then, if it's within the existing frame of the building?
So what we have, just for everybody's information, so Planning allows development to happen without planning permission or with prior notification. So things like putting a fence up in the back of the garden is general permitted development. It doesn't require any notification of us, provided it is set within a particular criteria, for example, up to 2 metres if it's in a rear garden. Class Q is one of these criteria, but it's essentially the one that refers to conversion of a barn to a dwelling, but there is a prior approval mechanism required for the PD to be established, permitted development to be established. There is also a very long list of criteria of what is allowed under that provision. Now, one of the provisions is that the building should not be extended by its conversion. So on that basis, if it was to qualify as a conversion under Class Q, the building should maintain its shape in terms of not being extended. It can be partly demolished and reduced in size, but it cannot be extended in size. So that would apply to both width, length and height. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, I have a number of reservations about this application. To me, it appears to be in a highly unsustainable location, requiring the use of private car, no public transport, no footpaths apparently in the area, actually. Apparently the developer didn't consult with the parish council regarding local housing needs. It's built partly on greenfield land, so I am struggling with this one and I'm erring towards recommending a refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Warboys.
I think I concur with the notion of this increase of size. The inclusion of Pandora's paddock does extend it into open countryside. It is, you know, the notion of the Class Q and the sort of use of the brownfield site gives me a sort of contradiction there. That, you know, it's good to see the utilisation of a brownfield site. And by its nature, because it's a barn, it would be out in the countryside and it would be in an unsustainable location. So that is my one reservation, that it would be good to see the future use of the brownfield site, which is echoed, I think, by the letters of support, which are very keen to see this redundant pig farm, I think it is, being demolished rather than being converted, and the general aesthetic area being proposed. Whether these 5 large buildings are the appropriate means of doing that is questionable.
Thank you for that. I think John just wanted to just pick you up on a brownfield site because I don't think it quite is.
Can I ask the case officer if they might just put the layout plan back on the screen a moment, and if yeah, just if you've got a general layout plan. Is there an existing one actually? Sorry, with the bar shown. Right, thank you. In respect of the land outlined in red, is all of that agricultural in use, or is it part garden at any point? Because the bit to the top, the north, appears to be, well, at least on the aerial photograph I've got, once upon a time used to be part of a garden, a domestic garden. Or is it definitely all agricultural? And the reason I'm asking this question is simply this. If it's purely agricultural land, then it is not regarded as previously developed land. If, however, in this case, because of the rural location, that any part of that land was used as domestic garden, even though everybody would assume a domestic garden is green land, domestic garden is regarded as previously developed land. It's a bit of an interesting irony. So there might be a split here, possibly not, but one way or the other we haven't got that proven, I guess. So, okay. So the assumption is that it is not previously developed land, but we can't be 100% sure maybe for the entirety of it. But I can't define, I just don't want members to make any assumptions of whether this is previously developed or not, in full or part, if we don't have the evidence before us to make that judgment with absolute certainty. Does that make sense? Ultimately, I would urge members to consider just an additional point. We do have planning history that has established some degree of residential development on this site, and I would, what weight you give that is obviously your discretion. I wouldn't disregard it entirely. I don't think that would be appropriate to do that. But whether you feel this enlargement is acceptable perhaps on a sustainability basis, given the provisions of Class Q are quite tight and specific, this exceeds that might be the direction you are looking for.
Councillor Matheson, thank you.
Yeah, well, I think probably there doesn't seem to be a member that's speaking in favour of approval, so I think I will propose refusal on the basis of it's not sustainable on the environmental dimension, quite specifically.
Are you talking about general sustainability or sustainability, the fact, the size? What exactly?
Sorry. Do you want me to? Yeah. Okay, so we've got two aspects here. There was conversations about the harm of this development in terms of the physicality of the design and whether it's appropriate in that context. And there was the other aspect that's been discussed so far, which is this location suitable for development in the sense of its sustainability, its connection to services and those aspects. Unless you are specifically talking about loss of hedgerow and other aspects, that's a different issue. I would say in respect of any loss of hedgerow and so on, I'm not aware that any of these trees or hedges are protected, and looking at the type that they were, I doubt they would be regarded as ancient hedgerow or anything like that. So I would be cautious to try and base any refusal on loss of landscaping if that was the environmental side. No, right. Okay, so we're back to just general sustainability of connections to the site then perhaps. And
if perhaps just to clarify, I mean, I think, I'm saying 316 does not offer a positive environmental dimension to sustainability. Elaborating that, in theory at least, there's no loss of hedgerow, quite so, but the location argues against it, and the visual intrusion, the visual environment is not improved as it should be improved. So that's the part of environmental that I'm talking about, which presumably those fit within that heading generally of sustainability.
There was Councillor Humphreys and then Councillor Richardson, but if Councillor Richardson wants to go first.
Thank you, Chair, and Councillor Humphreys. I am also objecting to this application, but I think I just want to, from my perspective, clarify that, in my view, I can accept the principle of development on this site. I think that there is scope for that, and I know that that principle is supported by the local community. But from my perspective, I think it's the scale and the density that I have most issue with. I don't think this is appropriate for the rural setting of this site. So I would have much preferred to see development along the lines of the Class Q application previously. So I would object on those grounds. But I can accept the sustainability of the site in principle for a smaller and more appropriate style of development.
Thank you. Councillor Humphreys.
Madam Chair, thank you. And yeah, I think it's unsustainable, and there's enough information here under 316 actually to cover that, and also our core strategies as well, I believe. If there's Class Q, it's already been approved, then it would get approval because that's a good use of an old agricultural building. It's not Class Q. This is 5 houses in the countryside in an unsustainable location, and because of sustainability issues mainly, I will support the recommendation of refusal and therefore second that approval, refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, did you want to say anything? I'm sorry, I wasn't quite sure.
It risk of repetition, really, that I I note that community view that they would like to see or are in support of development of this site, despite the obvious challenges it has in terms of connectivity and so on. But for me, it is inappropriate in terms of its scale and size now. So I would object on that basis too.
Thank you. I'm going to add into this, I mean, I've looked at all the information that has been sent to us. Obviously, we get these. And it might not be something to add to you, but I mean, clearly, according to all the photographs and the reports and everything, there are no footways and so on. Highways were relatively, we can't use this in our refusal, but highways were relatively unhappy with some of the issues. But I do have before me an appeal inspector's report on a nearby application. And it says, in part of Wilby Road, there is no footway, street lighting or cycleway, and the road at this point has a national speed limit of 60 miles per hour. Now, I believe the Foles Road comes out onto that, where there is a 60 mile an hour speed limit. And the inspector goes on in many ways, saying that it's unsustainable, and there was a refusal on a recent application there by the inspector. So I think, you know, it's interesting to note that inspectors also find that area unsustainable, but I don't think it's relevant to put that in a refusal, or could it be? If members who've proposed and seconded, would they like that as a little addition to it, but worded a little bit better than I'm struggling with?
Would you have if I make a suggestion?
Can we have a suggestion from our senior planner on that one, please?
Officers are mindful that this is a finely balanced application, so you know, I'm not going to lie, we did consider that there are reasons for refusal as much as there's approval that come forward. So we have thought about some of these issues that have been discussed. So I'm not going to lie that there isn't, I have got a refusal in front of me that I've been tinkering with while the debate's been going forward, but to sort of see if it addresses where members are perhaps going. My version of this, though, does not exclude or set aside the consideration of Class Q, and the reason for that is that I think it would be not appropriate for us to disregard it or set it aside. We need to, if we were to refuse this application, deal with that, because that's to make a robust defence at appeal. This is what the argument would centre around in part. So bear with me and you'll see where I'm going. If I read this, maybe this is roughly where members are going. The site benefits from a potential fallback position created by the previous and now lapsed Class Q barn conversion, reference number 3481 of 16, and full planning permission for the creation of one dwelling 18/02008 on site. However, it is considered that the application far exceeds both the scale of development and footprint of development established under these positions. The increase in the number of dwellings and increase in developed area of the site is such that it is not considered to be directly comparable and beyond the permitted allowance of Class Q, that accepts the burden of the development within strict criteria based on the principles of reuse of existing buildings and to restrict harm. Therefore, it is necessary to consider that the development of the site would represent sustainable development without any potential fallback, or when this position is exceeded. When weighed against the three strands of sustainability set out within the NPPF, while some positive benefits can be found when considering the social and economic impacts of development, the location of the site is poorly connected to services, and I have put including education provision. There are no nearby facilities to speak of such that would be an overwhelming and as such there would be an overwhelming dependency on the use of private car travel by future residents of the site. Whether we then add any considerations of the design of the buildings and if they're in keeping with the rural environment, we could. And then I would say that consequently the scale of the environmental harm identified and the scale of the development, when balanced against the benefits of the site, would clearly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of approving the application judged on its merits, and therefore it's contrary to your policies H7, HB1 of the local plan, CS1, CS2 and CS5 of the core strategy, and the NPPF.
Yeah, well, I think if John's advising that we need to demonstrate in the reasons that we've considered the Class Q position, then we have considered it. So, you know, if we need to say so, then I'd absolutely accept what John's proposed.
Right, on that basis, without reading it out again, are we happy to make a decision on that? Did you want to add anything else? I think something else.
So, what I've just read out, essentially my only question for members is if that was to include any specific considerations of the design of the proposed development and whether it is in keeping or out of keeping with the surrounding existing development, whether that's in or out.
Well, I mean, the visual lack of improvement was certainly, you know, quite a key part of what I was saying. So if that needs to be expressed as design rather than an environmental improvement or deterioration, then again, and I take John's.
Councillor Humphreys.
I'm sorry, does that come under H7?
Well, in terms of the design, I was going to suggest that we consider a phrase such as, it is further considered that the design of the proposed development would be out of keeping and out of character with the surrounding development and rural environment. Yep.
Got both the proposer and seconder happy with that too. Right. So on that basis, all those in favour of a refusal on the points just made, please raise your hands. And we are unanimous with that. Thank you very much indeed. Do we need to take a break now or can we move on? Does anybody need a break? No? Can we move on? Just a very quick break then, if you would, please. Right, thank you very much. We now resume, and we have Catherine to present the next case, which is Hawley, Stow Upland and Weatherden. Application, isn't that right? Yep, page 109. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for outline planning permission with some at Mattia, and then further to the east is the other part of Old Newton. It is obviously situated adjacent to it, and there are already residential dwellings along the edges. This just shows that whilst at the moment it is in the outside the settlement boundary, within the emerging joint local plan, which does have limited weight at the moment, parts of the site would actually fall within it. So this area would fall within the proposed settlement boundary area, as would this area. It would just leave a smaller area down here that would still fall outside of the settlement boundary, but again, it's adjacent to it. And it should be noted that obviously as this is a draft joint local plan, it does hold limited weight at the moment. This is just an aerial map in context. So as you can see, it's an agricultural field at the moment, and there are further agricultural fields to the south, and you can see the residential form. So that's the site location plan. And it should be noted that there is history on part of the site. So this grade area here, there was in 2017 an application was made for the erection of 23 dwellings. It went to committee and the members were minded to approve, and at the moment it's understood that it's waiting section 106, so potentially regardless of the outcome of this could still go ahead in its current form. But that's obviously only part of the site, as you can see. So this just shows in context to some of the services. Oh, sorry. So the site is down here. You have a community centre just roughly here. The village shop, I believe, is up here. There's a couple of bus stops here, which will be on a later slide, and then the primary school is slightly further away to the east, but down here. That shows that as part of a proposal, the access to the site, which is down here, a footpath will be installed, obviously coming out of the site, as well as the opposite side of the road to link the site up to the community centre, which is slightly further away. So this just shows the connectivity. So the obviously entrance to the site will be here. There's going to be footpaths along here to some, obviously the field and the green space. There's a footpath link that will go down along here with access to the bus stops, and obviously the same here, access to these two bus stops. So it's a short walk, approximately 355 or 125 metres, depending on which footpath you take out of the site. Obviously, as this is outlined, but the landscaping is to be considered. This is the landscaping scheme proposed. So here you can see along the southern boundary is quite a wide green belt, which will have various planting, I believe wooded area. It will allow access to the existing footpath, which will run through the site. There are connectivity points alongside Green Acres, a further footpath and connectivity point along here. And it will also provide screening to the development as you approach from the south, and finishes off the agricultural fields with the development. And this just shows the view. So from the public footpath, as you're approaching the site, you would first obviously encounter the green buffer belt. There is a listed building, which is obviously identified here in yellow. And at the moment, this is the extent obviously of its setting, and then further out potentially into the site. As you can see, there's been development to the east, there's been development obviously to the west and across the road there's more development. The proposed landscaping scheme retains an element of green area and open space rather than proposing any dwellings in this to maintain the existing setting. It will mean that the listed building still has views out, and also there are still then viewpoints from the actual application site and the footpaths into the listed building for appreciation of its setting. In terms of obviously the scheme, again, outline only, so the proposed layout of the dwellings, as you can see there, is indicative, but it is suggested that should members be minded to approve that condition is made for bungalows in potentially this location and obviously this location in order to protect future residential amenity for these occupiers and also the existing dwellings over here. So this is a site access layout. It's unfortunately the plan can't get much bigger, so it's not probably easiest to see. But originally Highways did have some concerns with the access and amended. I think this plan was altered, and also we had a speed survey and transport survey done. So Highways objections been removed, and they're now happy with the proposal. This is just a photograph to show the front of the site, and the access would be just behind this, slightly further down. And then this is from the corner near Green Acres, which is to the west. So you can see the houses here. This is the roof line of the listed buildings, so a lot of the site would be there with the green buffer zone roughly coming along here. So the recommendation is for approval subject to section 106 and other conditions. It is noted that at the moment Ecology Place Services have got a holding objection due to them requiring great-crested newt surveys, but it's considered that we can secure this by way of a condition obviously on potentially any approval, so that they undertake the surveys while the section 106 negotiations are taking place, and that submission of the further surveys would be needed before they make the reserve matters.
Thank you. Yes, please do. Thank you very much.
Just to add to the presentation, if I just turn attention to page 109, apologies for blank planning permission. It should say granted to grant outline planning permission with conditions in 106. So the header is incorrect on your papers, and I apologise for that. And just as an additional element, on your conclusion and the conditions being recommended on page 129, the 4th bullet point up in the conditions, which says renewable energy scheme to be agreed, just to confirm that that is as the wording of the consultee response on page 165, the last, I think it's 4 paragraphs, so it's referring to that condition recommended by our consultee, and not a generic energy strategy condition. It's more specific than that, and it's referring to the consultee response, and that's on page 165. And apologies if that's not sufficiently clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do members have questions for the planning officer? Councillor Richardson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, if you could go back to the slide where they've circled the bungalows that would be required by way of conditions. Yes, that's the one. I just had a couple of questions based on this. Firstly, for the ones highlighted in pink, it says those are to be, if I've understood the colour coding correctly, they're to be affordable rented flats. Could I just clarify what size, in terms of number of stories, they would be? And secondly, what they are adjacent to in terms of the properties around them, if that makes sense.
Okay, so it's for outline with only access and landscaping to be considered. So in terms of, one, the location of the affordable housing, and also the style, height, that's not up for consideration. So whilst it's slightly, it's indicative, so it doesn't mean that that's what will be approved, so that's not up for consideration. In terms of what's obviously opposite them, I believe it's sort of car parking areas and garages, but I may be incorrect on that point. I think, yeah, I was going to say, I think these are properties, and then I think there's a area of parking here and here. But yeah, so in terms of their height and everything else, it will come in at the reserve matters, and obviously at that point we can then assess the implications and residential amenity for that.
And thank you. And Councillor Matheson?
Yeah, again, accept it. Oh, it's gone. Same slide, please. Oh, well done. Yeah, accepting that this is not the reserve matters, but I just want to flag up also on that layout that as far as I can see, and it's a bit small, etc., but we've got all the 22 affordables are in a single block, effectively. A single part of the site, and that's contrary to what the officers have requested, housing enabling officers have requested.
Yeah,
so
I think that will come up in
later.
when we do it later, if it should be approved today. Yeah, thank you, John.
Please.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions for the officer? No? Yes? Councillor Warboys, thank you.
Yes. Could you mentioned there's an existing planning application for this?
Yeah. So obviously the whole site is within red line, including that, but this area had a planning application in 2017 was made for 23 dwellings. Like I said, it went to committee and members approved it at committee, and at the moment it's still sat within the planning system, and my understanding as of last week and even this week is that the section 106 is still yet to get underway. I've spoken to the agent. Obviously, if this application were to be approved, they would potentially withdraw that application. They could only carry out one scheme anyway, but that area was previously recommended for approval and granted at committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. No more questions? In that case, then, we can move on to the Parish Council, and Jonathan Miller, if you'd come forward, please. Press it on, that's it.
Hi, thank you. The proposed development was discussed at Parish Council meetings as part of the pre-application consultation. The outcome of these meetings was that there was no support either from the Parish Council or public. It was felt the proposal would have a negative impact on Old Newton's landscape and appearance, especially because of the elevated position in the village. It would also impose a further strain on the infrastructure provision, which is already stretched. One point there, the school is full and children are having to be bussed out of the village to other villages for their education. In the emerging joint local plan, Old Newton is designated a hinterland village, and the District Council has already stated each of these villages should have to provide about 30 new properties in the period between 2018 and 2036. Old Newton has already met its development requirement, as nearly 60 dwellings have recently been passed with either full or outline planning. So therefore, we have double the recommended numbers. Also, with regard to the proposed development, a significant area of the site is outside the settlement boundary, as detailed in the draft joint local plan. So it represents an ad hoc development without the safeguards of strategic planning. The planning officer, however, did comment on the parish council's feedback on the proposed development and stated, within the adopted core strategy document 2008, Old Newton is classed as a primary village. It is noted within the emerging draft joint local plan, it is classed as a hinterland village. However, this is only in Regulation Out 18 and therefore holds very little weight. It is disappointing that planning appears to be adhering to a outdated 2008 policy and not taking a proactive approach in aligning more closely with the emerging joint local plan. But if this is the case, it should be noted the whole of the proposed development site is outside the settlement boundary of the village, and therefore, as Mid-Suffolk have their 5-year land supply, it should be refused. The proposed development will also encroach on the setting of several heritage assets, 2 of which are listed buildings. I know the planning officer only mentioned 1. The harm identified is considered to outweigh the benefits of the development as determined in the National Planning Policy Framework. As consistency in decision-making is important, it should be noted that the Council's Heritage Department has recently refused a much smaller development just down the road, partly on the basis that the proposal affects the character, setting and significance of Grade 2 listed heritage assets of a similar farmhouse and cottages, contrary to the NPPF.
Can you now finish, please? You're on your 3 minutes, please.
Sorry?
You're now on your 3 minutes. Could you finish now, please?
There are other sites that are similarly being identified as the heritage state. One other area is the concern on wildlife because the site is a meadow that has been in meadow status for over 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to stay there, just switch the button off and there might be some questions for you just for a moment, please. Any questions for gentlemen? No? No, thank you. We did hear everything you said. Thank you very much indeed. And now we come to Mr. Short, please, the agent for the site. Oh, sorry, have I got... Oh, I beg your pardon, sorry, I've crossed you. I do beg your pardon. Mr. Helliwell, is it? Michael Helliwell? I beg your pardon. Sorry, I crossed you off and I got the wrong crossings off. Please come down. It's the pills. I'm so sorry. I crossed him off before he even got them. So this gentleman is an objector, Mr. Helliwell. Thank you.
This application is from the state of 64 dwellings, which on your figures will represent approximately 160 extra residents in a village of approximately 1,100 residents. Planning permission already exists for over 60 other dwellings in the village, so our village population is expected to increase by nearly 25% in one short hit. This is a country village, not an overspill town, and it does not represent controlled development in any way, shape or form. Most of the site is outside the agreed settlement boundary and partly on an ancient meadow that hasn't been ploughed for well over 50 years. This meadow would actually be a wonderful wildlife site for the community. Why is this happening at all? Why are we here? Who needs this development? Well, certainly not those living in the village, none of whom have supported it verbally or in writing. Presumably not with Suffolk Council, because they've already admitted they have adequate supply of housing, approved sites for their future needs. This only leaves the landowners and developers. It seems the whole proposal goes back to the outdated development plan of 2008 and not on the new, properly thought out strategic plan, which is at its final stages, where we are now classed as a hinterland village and therefore should be subjected to much lower development. Well, perhaps it's because the infrastructure already exists. Nonsense. Church Road is already very busy and not wide enough to warrant even a central white line. It's poorly lit with little pavement and is often single lane due to parked cars on each side. It is very dangerous, and I live on it, for mums and dads walking their children down to the village school and back, as well as the dog walkers. The school itself, as we know, is already oversubscribed, and children in the village are already being transported to other schools at your expense. Well, perhaps it will bring some benefits to the village. What? There's minimal local employment, with no more currently planned. So commuting to work and to shopping, and by the way, Stowmarket is 3 miles away, not 1.8, will only increase the traffic on the busy B713 and the equally congested A14. Is this part of your plan? The bus service, you mentioned, 3 to 4 buses a day. It's a bit of a joke and it's hardly used. We have no pub now, and where's the restaurant you mentioned? Even the walk from the new residence to the village shop, you will have to cross the road 5 times if you want to stay on the pavement. If you don't believe me, try it. And what about the less than substantial impact this will have on the Grade 2 listed Pond Farm cottages and Burnham cottages? They will be surrounded, as will Pond Farm Barn, and probably the most important, architecturally and historically, the clay lump Burnham Barn.
Can you now finish, please? You're on your 3 minutes.
Why shouldn't they be afforded the same protection as listed Ashburnham cottages and the Grange were last year? On the basis, the proposal affects the character, setting and significance of these heritage assets and was turned down. This development is unwanted and unnecessary, and I urge you to reject it.
Thank you. Members, do you have questions? Councillor Warboys, yes, please.
Thank you. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer this, but the previous speaker mentioned that this was a meadow status. Mutton Meadow.
Meadow.
Is this a triple SI or is it a site of special scientific interest? Or?
I'm not aware it's actually been registered as such, but would make a very good site.
I can answer that one. No, it isn't. It isn't registered as a site, unfortunately. Meadows are few and far between, aren't they? Yeah. Right. Any further questions? No? Then thank you very much indeed for your passionate response. Thank you. Sorry I missed you out earlier. And now Mr. Leslie Short, please, if you'd like to come forward. Thank you.
Good morning, members. I'm Leslie Short of Artisan Planning and I represent the applicant. Can I just draw your attention to the nature and character of the development proposed for this site? The site measures about 9 acres in old money. Of that site area, over 2.5 acres is public open space and structural landscaping. So almost a third of the site is a functional landscape area, screening the development, but at the same time enhancing wildlife habitats and enhancing biodiversity prospects. In terms of housing development, about 2 acres is already the subject of a positive resolution by this council for 23 dwellings, and an additional acre is allocated for housing in the council's new draft plan. The scheme before you today embraces the council's prior commitments, but is capable of delivering much more for the benefit of the district and the local community. Turning to planning policy, where those policies which are most important for determining a planning application are out of date, paragraph 11 of the framework mandates permission should be granted unless there are clear reasons for refusing the proposal or adverse impacts outweigh the benefits. Members, your council officers accept and advise you that certain local plan policies are out of date within the definition prescribed within the framework. It is therefore common ground that the most important policies are out of date, thereby triggering the need to apply the so-called tilted balance in your decision-making today. Applying that tilted balance means that you should grant planning permission for sustainable development, except where the benefits are significantly and demonstrably outweighed by the adverse impacts. So what are the benefits of the development and what are the harms? Growth of the scale envisaged in this application is appropriate in principle to a primary village. This proposed development constitutes growth, but it's still relatively small scale, but vital growth. The application site lies adjacent to the existing settlement boundary, is well connected to the key services and facilities this village has to offer. Many are within walking distance. It is also well connected and in close proximity to Stowmarket. The scheme will deliver 64 dwellings, which will assist the council in meeting its housing need, which should carry significant weight. The scheme will deliver 22 affordable dwellings, which will assist the council in meeting a continuing affordable housing need. This too should carry significant weight in your decision making. The scheme will deliver a wide choice of quality market and affordable homes, many of which will be single storey. We're showing 17 bungalows in the indicative layout. And so again, delivering benefits within the social limb of any sustainability assessment. In terms of economic benefits, there will be a short-term boost, probably for about 3 years, to employment, but a much more substantial contribution in the long term to the local economy from the new residents of the housing, helping to maintain the vitality and viability of local services, both in Old Newton and adjacent villages. In terms of the environment, the proposed development comes with a combined ecological and landscape strategy, which will secure effective mitigation and biodiversity enhancement and be a positive asset for the community. You will see that on slide 12. So what you see today before you is deliverable. When these benefits are weighed against the low level of harm
you are up on your 3 minutes, please.
identified, it's clear that they do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and I urge you to agree. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Short? No? I just have a question which possibly is not relevant, but relevant. Is this developments involved with the same person? You are one and the same for the already approved section of it?
It's the same landowner, but the inference, or rather the specific suggestion in conversation or engagement with the case officer, is that if this development is approved, the other application will be withdrawn.
Yeah, but is it the same developer? The same?
No, it's not.
No, right, thank you. Councillor Gould?
Thanks. I don't know if it's permitted, but I have a question that arises from what the speaker has said, but is probably a matter for the officers. And it concerns this matter about policies being out of date. And as I understand it, recent cases have demonstrated that there is a test of relevance. That's my term, not necessarily the lawyer's term, but there is a test of relevance. It means that policies aren't automatically out of date. They need to be considered in terms of the context of the specific application before us. I'd appreciate some advice.
That is true, but mid-Suffolk policies, how can I put this delicately, have been pretty much tried and tested and destroyed at appeal in the last year in terms of being out of date. So as much as there is a test of relevance, the test of relevance has pretty much been overhauled on the appeal circuit, and not least thanks to the Woolpit appeal, when it was very clearly declared that the housing supply policies that we have are clearly out of date, and that is with or without relevance to the 5-year land supply. So I would say that if we were to try and defend that point, we have a lot of appeals that would be against us in order to put any kind of robust appeal around that issue.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Short. You may return to your seat. Thank you very much indeed. And now we come to Councillor Ebone, if you would, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members. This application is not supported by the local community and has many impacts on the village and villagers. You'll have seen comments from residents on the ecology of site, on rights of way, traffic, the issue of children walking to school, and the status of Old Newton in the emerging plan as a hinterland village. The bus service has also been reduced recently, making the village less sustainable. And I know in the papers the officer refers to Old Newton as a core village, but again, this is in the old core strategy that we're frequently told to apply until wait to due to its age. There's already planning permission for 23 homes tucked in behind Green Acres and Mutton Meadow within the settlement boundary. This is almost a third of the homes proposed in the current application, and that's been approved at outline, as you've heard. This application covers a much larger area, the majority of which is outside the existing and proposed settlement boundary. And the Officer's report states there is no overriding need to approve sustainable development outside of settlement boundaries, and this view should be adhered to. Currently, the meadow and farmland outside of the settlement boundary provide a buffer separating the village from the farmhouses to the south and the east. The core village is at a high point in the landscape, and the application site will be prominent in appearance when viewed from the southwest and from the northeast, which will also negatively impact on the rural nature of the village. It also impacts the setting of Pond Farmhouse and will cut off the connection between the listed building and the surrounding farmland. Adjacent to this site is a pond by which it's known that a great crested newts breed. Ground nesting birds are also found in the meadow. This application will be extremely harmful to these ecologies which cannot be replaced, and mitigation for this has not been provided. Including the approved outline application that's already approved, there are over 80 houses approved in Old Newton. The village's own housing survey identified a need for a much smaller number, and the strategic housing team have identified a very small number of housing needed. This contravenes many policies, CSO2, CSO5, H16, HBO1 and CLO8 to name but a few. There's no need to approve this application. One already exists, tucked in behind the existing housing, and for all the reasons I've given, I urge the committee to recommend refusal. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Do members have any questions for Councillor Eburn? No? Thank you. I have a statement from Keith Wellham, who unfortunately couldn't be here. Old Newton is a hinterland village in which, according to the draft local plan, development will be permitted within settlement boundaries when certain criteria are met. Most of the proposed development site is outside the proposed settlement boundary. It should be noted that in the case of the current Gladman application in Stow Upland, that site is within the draft JLP proposed settlement boundary, but outside the settlement boundary as set out in the approved neighbourhood plan. In that location, officers have told me that they would recommend the application to be approved up to the JLP proposed settlement boundary. For consistent, the Old Newton application should be refused as much of the site is outside the proposed settlement boundary. It is also outside the existing settlement boundary. Even if the site were wholly within the proposed settlement boundary, there are criteria which would need to be met before the site should be approved. This proposal would fall at the first hurdle. The design is not sympathetic to the rural surrounding and does not demonstrate high quality design. The proposed site is on the edge of the settlement. In its undeveloped state, it makes a contribution as a gap between the edge of the village and farmland. It is on high land above the Gipping Valley and can be seen from some distance. The listed building is set close to and can be viewed from this undeveloped land. If the application is approved, then the open setting will be lost. In hinterland villages, according to the draft JLP, the cumulative impact of proposals will be a major consideration. 47 properties have already been approved in Finningham Road, and smaller developments are also proposed. If this application is approved, the impact upon the village infrastructure would be unacceptable. There would be additional traffic on Church Road, which is a route to school with, for most of its length, no footpath. There is an existing and proposed junction virtually opposite the location of the proposed access to the development site, resulting in additional road safety hazards and potential for collisions. And that's Councillor Keith Wellham's statement. Thank you. So, we are now into debate. Who'd like to kick off with that one today, please? Councillor Matheson, thank you.
Yeah, picking up that very last point from Councillor Wellham, can we look at the map of the village to see that point about the lack of walking facility to the school? How does that actually work? possibly Councillor Ebo may be able to help us on that as well.
Site entrance will be here, and also this part is the site, and the school is here. I think in my report it does acknowledge, obviously there's no footpath along the east. They'd have to obviously walk on the road, but obviously all the residents at the moment would be doing the same anyway. So like the school there, and then the site's there.
I think it would be helpful if the ward member, are we happy to ask the ward member? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the majority of the route the children walk along the road, and the head teacher's been very successful in encouraging parents and children to walk to school by parking. If they have to drive, they park in the village hall car park, which is opposite the site, and then walk. The majority of the way is actually just on the road.
Thank you for that. That was a useful bit of updated information.
Yeah, there is no footpath. There is no footpath.
No footpath, that's the information, yeah. Lovely. Right, anyone else? Continue on this one.
Madam Chair, thank you. I have some real concerns with this, in a moral sense, really, and then we'll come on to the regulations. The moral side of it is this, that as Mid-Suffolk District Council has already written its joint local plan, well, it's at Regulation 18. We've identified this place, Old Newton, as a hinterland village for the future, which means limited amounts of construction. And I'd just like to ask the question, if it was a hinterland village, which it's not at the moment, what would be the maximum amount of buildings permitted? Before I carry on with the debate.
I was kind of hoping you weren't going to ask this question because I don't think you're going to like the answer. No, actually, your problem here is, let's start from the beginning. So the current local plan defines this village as a primary village. Now, actually, what was quite good about the core strategy was that it did kind of have a hierarchy. So you had towns, you had key service centres, you had primary villages, and then you had secondary villages. Ironically, only secondary villages had a cap on development, which was infill, which was defined as 1 or 2 houses. The others, primary, key service, this is primary, didn't actually have any cap on the development that you could have within the settlement boundaries. Looking now at the policy SP03 and the hinterland villages policy, in order to be in accordance with the NPPF, it doesn't have a cap on development at all for any level of development type villages. So if you put a cap on the number of houses, it would be instantly contrary to the NPPF. So ironically, we're into this very interesting policy balance. Our current policy, which has a cap within its policy, and we've already established is out of date because of its non-compliance with the NPPF. The future policy, which doesn't have any cap on development anyway for hinterland development, would be in accordance with the NPPF, but it has very little weight because, of course, of its emerging status. So these are the balance that you need to look at. This gets more complicated because ultimately we have a change in the settlement boundary as an emerging change of that settlement boundary. So there are now effectively 2 parts of this site that would be within the proposed settlement boundary, one of which has already got 23 houses resolved to be approved on, but that's not a decision as yet, it's been resolved. Interestingly enough, the other section of land that's been included within the settlement boundary is directly opposite another listed building. So that consideration of that has taken place over there. What we're dealing with in respect to what is outside the proposed settlement boundary, be careful what I say, is a lot of landscaping. There's one middle section that is essentially the fresh bit that would be new development beyond the proposed settlement boundary. That said, all of that has little weight because what we should be dealing with is the current settlement boundary, but our policy on that is out of date, unfortunately. So my conclusion on all of this is we are left with the NPPF and whether or not it is a sustainable development judged on its merits.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah, I've still got real empathy with people on this, on the moral side, because this is outside the settlement boundary for the majority of this development, which seems to me is we've got the 5-year land supply under Section 11 of the MPPF. There's no requirement actually to pass this at all. And that's what I'll come back to as my full stop on this one, unless I'm wrong. And if we can put the map up, please, of the future settlement boundary with the site on it, please. That's the one, keep going, that's it. As you can see, the majority, even though the bottom bit, I agree, is landscaping, there is still a large proportion of that which will be developed. Now, inside of the settlement boundary, in fact, quite a lot of that will be developed actually. It's only a small band that's landscaped on the bottom south side. The area to the left within the settlement boundary, that's the area I believe that's already been given permission for planning permission. So there's no change there. If this one goes through, it's that same area, it's fine. And the only other bit that they could actually build in within the settlement area is up towards the entrance onto the main road, which is quite small. So this development under the future and on the proposed settlement boundary, the majority of the development, I would argue, is outside of the settlement boundary. We could go down to square metres, but just looking at that, the majority of it is outside of it, is it not?
We're not denying that, well actually, at the moment, the entire thing is outside of the current local plan settlement boundary. And if this had, or if you give this emerging plan more weight in your discretion of your judgment, ultimately, I'm not denying that a degree, more than half of the development will still be outside of the settlement boundary. What I would urge you to do, though, is identify the harm in that respect and what is demonstrational harm in respect of the MPPF. Whether it's in or outside of the settlement boundary, I hate to say it, is not going to be a robust argument in respect of any appeal.
Okay, thank you. So it's outside the settlement boundary. Section 11 of the MPPF says that actually, because we've got the 5-year land supply, we don't have to actually approve this. On balance, though, you're right. What's the harm? So if I arrived from space in my spaceship and I hovered over Old Newton and looked down and went, I need to build some houses because we need bungalows and we need affordable housing within mid-Suffolk, we definitely do. Where would I put it? That's a definite, really obvious infill place that I'd build. So I understand why they want to develop there, and I understand the need for the buildings. And this is it, it's a balance at the moment. I've got this moral bit that goes to me, it's outside the settlement boundary, it is a small village, I think it is quite a lot of buildings for a small area, but on the other hand, we do need houses, we do need bungalows, we do need affordable housing, and that's a suitable place for it. It's a bit of an issue, isn't it? And the local emerging local plan, although it's in Regulation 18, it doesn't have no weight, it has little weight. And we can come back to that, can't we?
Anyone else? Councillor Matheson, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I carefully read through each application's report and perform a series of mental somersaults regarding the settlement boundaries and the whether policies are material or not material, etc., etc. And in this particular one, or the larger part of this particular one, it does at least seem to me that the two settlement boundary policies, both of which have limited weight, both of which are saying, well, actually, we don't think this is the right place for whatever reason. And so, that is, it is still a factor in the overall scheme of things here. Beyond that, I think it's tricky and it's on balance, and it's a bit hard to argue need. So I'm still sitting on the fence thinking about this one at the moment.
I think so are a few people, Charlie. It's a really difficult one. Does anyone else wish to speak? Because we're going to have to sort of move the debate on. Councillor Warboys.
My immediate reaction to this is to sort of support the comments of the Parish Council. I think in Old Newton you're seeing the cumulative effects of development and right concerns about future development, where you've got, counting the 47 new houses on Finningham Road, the 24 are already agreed on this site. That's already 71 houses, which is far in excess of what their own housing survey needs require. They do have some facilities within Old Newton, but as has been already explained, the primary school is actually at full capacity. Children are actually going to have to be bused to further afield, and the resources of the village are already overstretched. It is good to see the affordable housing, and I'd be reluctant to sort of lose the affordable housing, but I think the scale of the development is in excess of what would be appropriate for Old Newton. And there is also the loss of the amenity land, the meadows and the diversity of wildlife that already exists there.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? I mean, we're going to have to sort of either make a decision or keep our thoughts to ourselves. It really is a difficult one because, I mean, I'm on the focus group working on the joint local plan, and it does seem to be grinding on ever slowly. But we've got to accept what we've got at the moment to deal with our decisions. Yeah, Councillor Gould.
Thanks. I can agree that this is far from clear cut. Although the emerging joint local plan itself has limited materiality, the reasoning, thinking and evidence that lies behind the development of the joint local plan is clearly valid, you know, because it's there in the joint local plan. What weight in formal terms we can give to the plan itself may be limited. So the way the settlement boundary is being drawn in that joint local plan is obviously for a reason based on some evidence and some policy rationale. It seems to me that we already have permission for part development of that site, which is in accord with the joint local plan. Could be said to meet certainly the known needs, more than the known needs of Old Newton as things stand. And therefore that seems to me to be logically a position to go to, in saying that actually the 63 that have been already agreed, subject to, is almost the end of it for me in terms of the development of this site. If settlement boundary is a concept that has any meaning, we ought to stick with it, I think, because what we know is that, you know, today's boundary is always at risk of becoming tomorrow's creep. So maybe for me, I think I'm settling on a position in my own mind, which is about what we've agreed is it really, and I'm kind of minded against the proposal, though not convinced. I haven't convinced myself sufficiently to make that a proposal. Hear what others say.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that's where everybody's struggling at the moment. I think that's a very useful comment. However, there is something on page 118 regarding the ecology, and one of the objectors mentioned that the field is, you know, although it's not designated, it's an important area. And they have said, put a holding objection in due to insufficient ecology information. And I wonder whether, at the moment, that might be something that we could defer on at the moment, because they haven't got all the information in, and it was flagged up that this was an important ecological site. I wonder what members think about that. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly got some sympathy with that. The other thing I wanted to just ask about, we have had recently, let's just say, recent meetings going back, increasing emphasis on deliverability, and I haven't noticed any particular comments either that we've heard or in the report about that. So the fact that the approved 24, I think it wasn't only that the section 106 was under discussion, I think it was not under discussion. I think if I got that part rightly from Mr. Pateman G, I just wonder whether officer comment on that might help, although I do sympathise with the chair's point.
I think deliverability, would be...
We have nothing on deliverability from the applicant.
I was going to say that would be something that the officer needs to discuss with the applicant, perhaps outside this room, so I wonder if that's another reason we could defer this at the moment for further investigations. No.
We don't, I'm checking with the case officer as I speak, but we don't have, not that it is required, but it has been recognised as a consideration, and one of the considerations is the deliverability of development and, how fast on site will developer get to build out the scheme. And ultimately, we don't have any details around that at this time. Obviously, in this forum, I can't just ask the applicant to produce that. That might either be a very straightforward, no, we can't give you that information, or it might be they need to go away and work on that and come back with a proposal. So, on that basis, that would be something we'd have to go away and look at if that was additional information that members needed that would give weight one way or another to their deliberations.
Can I just ask legal, then if we asked for that information and the ecology, could we go for a deferral?
That would be, if the committee don't feel they have enough information to make a decision today, that would be entirely proper, if that's obviously the majority view of the committee.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor, I saw a hand up here. Was it you, Councillor Humphreys? Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have we not got to be careful on that? This is outline planning permission, and it does say in one of your notes that there would be a condition put in that you'd get that information prior to reserve notice.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yes. And going on, again, this is a really difficult one. No matter how you look at it, it's really difficult because playing with people's emotions, we're talking about out-of-date regulations, we're talking about the moral component of this as well, and doing what's right. And that's I hate those positions because there's all these things working against each other. I've got a question about overdevelopment or perceived overdevelopment of this village rather than site, and whether that has any weight or value. Because to me, this is overdevelopment of a small rural village in Suffolk. It's in excess of what's required. There's no requirement for this additional 64 houses. We've already had planning permission granted for part of it. I just wonder what the weight might be, or how we'd come to a conclusion that this might be overdevelopment of the village rather than the site.
I go back to my original standing point, which is ultimately what is the demonstrational harm. I'm sorry to put that forward, but the number game is a number game. We could have X many houses being, and I hate to say, there are villages that have had exceeding high numbers of houses being added to their village, and ultimately what we've got to get down to is, does that cause a problem with severe traffic impact? Does that cause a problem with facilities within the village that are unable to cope with that? It's those individual planning considerations that are part of that question, not it's too many houses. Because I can't argue too many houses is a problem if I don't have the reason why it's a problem to follow.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Much like all of the other councillors who have already spoken, I am conflicted about this application. There are aspects that I like about it, aspects that I don't. I think to start with, I will talk on a sort of slightly more positive note about the things which I do think are commendable about this application. I think, sorry, yes, I've got a slight cold, so apologies for that. So I think, firstly, I do welcome the fact that there are a large number of affordable homes as part of this application. I do welcome the large number of bungalows and the consideration that's been given to their location within the site to avoid any overlooking or loss of residential amenity. And I do think, actually, I do commend the extensive work that's gone into the landscaping around this application. I do think that is a very welcome consideration that we don't always see in applications or developments of this size. What I am uncomfortable with, which has already been mentioned again, but I would just reiterate my own views, that it does, the sheer number for a village of this size and the questions about whether or not it's genuinely needed, I think is a valid point. And I do understand and share the concerns about the questions of it being outside both the existing settlement boundary and the settlement boundary proposed in the joint local plan. So I'm not happy with those aspects, but what the slight concern I have is, and why I don't think I would support a deferral, is because from my personal perspective, I don't think there's anything about the existing ecological studies or deliverability that would affect my decision making for this application. I think for the most part, the question, we know what the issues are, it's just how much weight we attach to different aspects of our concerns. So whilst I think I do recognise those concerns, it does go down to, I think, a question of the policies that we have to comply with. And although I am unhappy with aspects about the settlement boundary, about the size of this development, I don't think there is any harm that I could be certain I could identify. And whilst I don't like this application, I am leaning towards the view that I can't find a valid reason for refusal that would stand up against appeal.
Right, so we need to move on. So how are we going to move on that we've heard from everyone? Has everyone said what they want to say? Councillor Matheson?
Well, I will take up the Chair's hints about deferral. I think the arguments for deferral are not brilliant, but they are there. And we've had, and I mentioned deliverability. We have had, I can't remember whether it was Mr. Pateman-G or Mr. Isbell sitting in that chair a couple of meetings ago, wanting to attach considerable weight to the issue of deliverability and our need to achieve 500 and whatever it was houses a year, or else our policies would be held below the waterline again. So I think that is a significant point which we should explore. And I did just wanted to clarify that does the existing 23 deliver 7 affordables to policy as well?
Yeah, I believe it's 8.
Again, is 14 then, not 20.
So what was your conclusion on all that then? Ecology and deliverable. Councillor Gould. Yes, thank you for that, John.
I think we need to have, we defer it. We do so for genuine reasons. We don't do so because the decision is a difficult one and we don't know what to do. I don't think that's fair to anyone. So there are either substantive reasons for deferral or not. I remain very concerned about this feels disproportionate. Can for Old Newton, but we're being challenged to find a reason in terms of harm, which I like Councillor Richardson, struggle to do. So it seems that the reasons for turning it down that might otherwise be logical and rational aren't available to us. We have to find reasons in welcome to the world of planning. Yeah, we have to find reasons that are legitimate in planning terms. But I don't think personally, I can support deferral unless we have substantive reasons for doing so.
Right. John was just going to give us a bit more of a hand.
If I may suggest, just in terms of reasons to defer, ecology, as a council, we are, under a duty to protect habitats, and if we failed that duty, we can actually be exposed to significant costs. Now, we, as officers, have felt that given the amount of landscaping land available and the opportunities, even the worst case scenario, we felt we could condition mitigation sufficient enough to deal with that. However, members may feel that they need further information on the ecology issue up front in order to assure them in terms of the right decision in terms to comply with that duty. So I do regard that as a fairly good substantive reason to defer, if that is your members' wishes. On the terms of the deliverability, yes, it is upheld as can be upheld as a significant factor to give weight to. Now, if you are on such a balancing act, it might be that material consideration of the deliverability of this scheme and how certain and in what time frame the deliverability of this scheme comes forward, that may be, even if it's only a small bit of weight, additional weight that would lean your opinion one way or the other in respect to going forward on this development as a material consideration. So how significant weight you give that as a reason to defer it is ultimately your judgment, but you may wish to do that, and you can do that. I don't see any particular legal reason why not, as my colleague here has suggested. If I can help any further, please ask.
Just a point on that, it would come back to this committee if we do go down that route. So, we still have the same considerations. And if people feel they can make a decision today, then, then we need to make that decision. But, John, you did actually propose it, didn't you?
I did.
And there is no seconder at the moment. I threw it out from the chair, I must admit. Yeah, but I was just trying to help the debate moving forward. So I don't know if we don't get a seconder, then we have to move on. Is that correct?
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah. So
if we don't get a seconder, the motion would fall, and we'd be back to being in normal debate as per usual.
So although I started it, I'm not going to finish it. So if there is no seconder on that basis, then are you going to make a decision, gentlemen? You really must, or we must. So that will fall then. Yeah. So there we are. So Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. So I, again, just reiterate the previous points that I made, that having reflected on it and listened to the debate, although I'm not happy with a number of aspects of this application, I do think it would have an unpleasant impact on the neighbourhood and on the local community. I don't, in planning terms, think there is enough or sufficient reason to refuse. So on that basis, I will reluctantly propose that we accept the officer's recommendation and approve this application.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. And so, Councillor Humphreys.
Madam Chair, yeah, likewise, there's no legal reason to refuse this, and that's what we're down to. The moral component is there, and the rights and wrongs are there, but that doesn't stand up in law. And I think the problem is it would come back as it would come back to us, and I think we'd lose because there's nothing here to support refusal, nothing. So therefore, I'll second the approval.
Right, thank you for that. I've just sort of had a word with John there, and we can do a lot in reserved matters when it comes back again, which is important. So I have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour, reluctantly though might be, please vote now, please. Thank you.
2, 3, 4. 4. Yes.
And those against? 3. And thank you very much to everybody. It is not an easy decision. It really is not. Thank you. So if we move on now, please, to the final matter, land to the west of the former bacon factory at Elmswell. Right then, to the final case. Daniel, if you would please, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got another outline application, this time in Elmswell. It's, let's just get this right, erection of 65 dwellings with all matters reserved save for that of access. So there's even less detail for you members. So in terms of reserved matters, we'd be dealing with layout, appearance, scale and landscaping. Only access would be secured at this point. This is the site here. It's sort of roughly triangular, if you can try and give it as much a shape as you possibly can. We've got the rest of Elmswell here. If we look at constraints, we have a grade 2 listed building located here, and we have a number of footpaths. I'll just try and take you through them now, members, because that'll influence, that'll become important when we come to the photographs as well. So there's a public right-of-way extending along here to the north of the railway line, and also along here to the south of the railway line. That crosses the railway line at a certain point and then comes up through this development here. And I'll go through that as well when we get there. There's also public rights-of-way coming along the edge of this development and then coming up and joining the network to the north, and also comes along the top of this field as well. Now, in terms of the footpath network, there are a number of stops due to work. So this footpath here that crosses the railway line is stopped as it comes through here, and also this one is stopped as well due to the ongoing development of this site here, and I'll come to that in a moment as well. So if we come to the aerial map, apologies members, our aerial maps probably aren't quite as up to date as things on the ground. We've still got the former Grampian factory here. We've got an existing industrial site here, formed of a number of buildings and businesses. We've then got the edge of Elmswell here running along the railway line, and then continuing up Station Road here. If we update and have a look at the map courtesy of Google Earth, we can see some development ongoing here. That's as part of the 2013 Taylor Wimpey planning permission that was approved on this site here. And then if we go forward again, when we come to the pictures as well, members, I'll update you on that development. It's quite well advanced. We then come here, and this shows the relationship between the Taylor Wimpey site and the application site that we're looking at here. This is one of the master plans for the Taylor Wimpey site, just superimposed on the layout here. So if we come closer, we see the two proposed layouts superimposed against one another. In terms of the illustrative master plan, this area to the north here is to provide an attenuation basin for sustainable drainage. We've then got sort of 3 blocks of development here, here, and then here. And we've got 2 access points, one located here and one located here, that we'll come on to in more detail. And those would provide access through the Taylor Wimpey site onto Station Road here. So if we come closer into the illustrative master plans, the Taylor Wimpey site provides a spur of road to punch into the very south of the application site, and then further up as well there's a turning head which would in effect become a T-junction. T-junction? X-junction. I also wanted to just bring forward the contents of the draft joint local plan as well. So in terms of the expansion of Elmswell, we've got 3 sites around this site to come forward. We've got LA64 to bring forward approximately 60 units. We've got LA65 to bring forward approximately 50 units, and we've got LA66 to bring forward approximately 100 units. In terms of expansion of facilities, as part of the existing development, the infrastructure development plan, which is produced, sit alongside the draft joint local plan, notes that the existing primary school is to expand to offer 420 places. and that as part of the allocations in Elmswell and Woolpit together, there is to be provision of a new primary school in Woolpit to serve additional need. I just want to come for a moment to the access to the Taylor Wimpey site, seeing as this will be the access to the main highway here. So this is that access looking into the Taylor Wimpey site. This is the view from that access looking north, and then this is the view from the north looking down that access, and we've got the level crossing. I don't know if you can just see it in the distance there. If we come to the access plans from the Taylor Wimpey scheme, I apologise, I've not included the key, but we've got two light blue oblongs here. Each one of those represents a large refuse vehicle, with the access road being designed to allow them both to cross, one going into the site, one going out at the same time. In terms of their master plan, we have their main link road coming here and then coming through the site, and obviously we've got the access through here, there, and then we've also got the second access coming down through here in this area of open space. It's worthwhile noting that there's also a pedestrian access through at this point through into the industrial site to the immediate south. In terms of the site itself, this is a view from the south of the railway line looking towards the Taylor Wimpey site on the edge of the horizon here. This is that edge of development that we previously allowed, and you can see that site is well advanced. The idea with this scheme being that it would provide a sort of a phase two to that scheme. This is the view across the railway line, again from the south, because at this point I realised that there was a stop in place on the railway line, so you can't cross onto the other side. This is the edge of the Taylor Wimpey development, and that's looking up off. Here's the best view I was able to get of the site. Apologies for this one, members. It's currently grade 3 agricultural land. It's not currently cropped. And then this is the view from the edge of the Taylor Wimpey site till we get to the stop. And we can see the land sort of dip down and away from the development there. Now, in terms of highways, we've consulted with the Highways Authority based on the transport assessment submitted. They are of the opinion that within the wider road network, the only junction within Elmswell that operates above capacity is the junction from Church Road to School Road. However, they're content that sufficient alternative routes within Elmswell and the surrounding area exist, such that if people leaving this site in peak time were concerned, with queuing traffic at that junction of School Road to Church Road, they would make alternative provision. With regards to the layout of the site itself and taking the access points from the Taylor Wimpey site, highways have no issue, although they note that the arrangement is not ideal, and they point to the Suffolk Design Guide requiring development of over 150 units to be served by more than a single access. In wider terms, the site is well spatially related to the rest of Elmswell and its services and facilities, although in terms of the adopted development plan, it's outside of the development boundary, and in terms of the emergent joint draft local plan, I've said those in the wrong order, but never mind, you get the idea. It's also outside of the boundary obviously being this purple line that includes the edge of the Taylor Wimpey site, but doesn't go further off here either. Everything else is as within the report, members, although I draw attention to points 314, 319 and 12.6, when I refer to Elmswell as a town. That's obviously a typo and my mistake. That shouldn't be there. It's a village. Okay, I'll turn things back over to you, Chair, in case there's any questions from committee.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, question? Yes, Councillor Humphreys and then Councillor Gould. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. Just a point of clarification really. So page 51, which is from Highways, access and internal layout. It talks about a single access, but actually their comment is the proposed development accesses 2 points of vehicle access onto the Taylor Wimpey development. Is it a single access or double access to the site?
This proposal, in terms of judging this application on its merits, has 2 access points. But obviously, those 2 access points go into another housing estate that leads through to get to Station Road as a single point of access. So now we play the game of the guidance. On that issue, we did have a discussion about that before we came in, and I've got a few notes that may help members take that comment further, if you don't mind. I've written these down because I thought it would be useful to make sure I made sense as we go. So what we're dealing with effectively in terms of this access issue is page 16 of the Suffolk Design Guide. The Suffolk Design Guide is a very old document. It is adopted by all local authorities, including Mid-Suffolk. And it was adopted in 2000, and it is currently held by Suffolk County Council. It has not been updated, and therefore it is not updated as a consequence of the coming of the NPPF, which was in 2012, the first NPPF. And it is also regarded as an out-of-date document by the Highways Authority. In fact, that's actually stated on their web version. And what the Highways Authority have done since is they've commissioned or taken further the Manual for Streets and obviously their own parking guidance. So ultimately, they have more weight given to those documents. That's not to say you can't give it weight because it is adopted and it hasn't been unsaved. It is a saved document currently as the current design guide. We are in the middle of commissioning a new design guide, but that's been a work and project that's been ongoing for about 2 years so far, and I don't know when the end date of that is. However, going back to the design guide, what it actually says is for major access roads serving more than 150 and up to 300 dwellings, 2 points of access should be provided. However, it then also says where only 1 point of access is available, the road layout should form a circuit, and there should be the shortest practical connections between those circuits. Now, looking at the layout, what that effectively means is there is a circuit here. You know, there are alternative routes, looping, as it's also called, within the existing development that's been approved, and those loops will be continued within the proposed development put forward. But the reason for these loops, and the reason what we're talking about here, is not actually about traffic generation in terms of the number of houses. It's in relevance to access by fire appliances. So ultimately what we're dealing with is how do you get through an estate in the times of an emergency, and therefore a fire appliance needs to get through the estate quickly and effectively to get to the point of the fire. And if one of those routes was blocked because of parked cars or because of the fire itself, or for another reason, what is the alternative available? And that is essentially why they've fixed 150 dwellings as a start point before you get into the sort of circuits and so on. We already have 190 houses off one single access here. So it's already in excess of that guidance of 150. We have actually got situations in Mid-Suffolk which are far higher than that. Not least the allocation of Chiltern Lees and Stowmarket, which effectively has 815 houses served off a single access. Now, that access, that particular development, does have an emergency access available, but it's not a second access in respect of the guidance criteria, but it has but that emergency access only kicks in when the trigger point of 450 houses comes along. Because of the way the site's been developed. But, you know, so what we're basically saying here is we need to have reassurance that the emergency access element is available as have alternative routes through the estate. And in this case, we are saying that the proposal, and my colleague alluded to this within his presentation in respect of looking at the routing, that we feel that is satisfactory here in this respect, and we don't have an objection on the highway side on that basis. Does that help?
Amplifies it greatly, yes. Thank you for that. Councillor Gould, you were next, and then Councillor Richardson.
Right. Also on highways.
I'm so sorry, Chair, just pointing out we have...
Thanks. Also on highways, first to help with some initials. What's RFC? It's on page 18. It refers to, I guess C is capacity, R is road, maybe, but what is F for in this context? Yeah, I mean, it's...
So resident travel pack is RTP. It's about it's a deviation of the capacity in terms of the rates per hour.
Right.
In the context of the sentence, it's about the capacity, and I presume that's per hour or in terms of traffic generation, but yes, you have me there, and I should know that.
So it's the F that's vexing, not R is probably road, C is probably capacity. But anyway, ratio to flow capacity. Oh, ratio, right? Okay, okay. I'm now much wiser. Couple of paragraphs down, and I have a chronic unease when it comes to highways assessments.
This is a question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
There's a sense there about a video survey being undertaken in view of concerns about perception during the morning period, parents and children going to school being at risk. They say a video survey was taken, it was observed there were no pedestrians taking unnecessary risk. To be meaningful, that would need to be a survey at the appropriate time, sampled over a number of occasions. I wondered if there was any confidence, well, anything you can say to boost our confidence in that assertion.
So that will have been provided by the applicants as part of their transport assessment, and that will have then been assessed in and of itself by the Highways Authority, who have then come to their view. So presumably when they were undertaking their assessment of the transport assessment, I've said assessment too many times, it has been looked at and it is considered to be meaningful evidence.
I was just asking, so you have in effect satisfied yourselves as to the validity of that assertion, yeah?
Obviously, they follow a methodology in terms of what are standardised peak times for that survey to take place, and ultimately there's going to be variation between the different traffic surveys that we are presented with, but ultimately your experts, which are the Highways Authority, are satisfied at the evidence that they've been presented with in this case, and we've followed through with their recommendation.
Sorry, Chair, my question was around the Suffolk design guide requirements around access, but that's already been comprehensively answered, so I didn't need to ask.
Thank you. Right. Any further questions? Councillor Mansell.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. And I would just like to comment that I think it's a pity that there is no representative from Highways here, because in addition to...
Hang on, this is a question,
it is
not
a question.
Debate, please.
It is a question.
Yeah.
It is a question about highways, and I think that Highways people may need to answer it, but I can still quote the question. In addition to the question from Councillor Gould, I think there are some inconsistencies in what Highways have reported. There is a suggestion that residents will choose to take alternative routes to avoid the School Road, Church Road junction, which is already over capacity. I'd like to know what they think these suggested routes are, because I have doubts about their suitability and efficacy. They also make a statement that pedestrians and cyclists will benefit from improvements at this junction, but what are the proposals for the improvements at this junction?
They're the sort of questions I've already got down for later in our debate, but they're very valid questions, I must admit. I know your area extremely well, and my questions related to it, which I asked in the briefing, is how do you get round the roundabout to go to the Woolpit, pedestrian-wise and cycling, and what were the alternative routes? I think it goes via Pakefield and God knows what, not Pakefield. I want to know the answer to those alternative routes as well, and, you know, so I'm with you 100% on that. So, Daniel, do you have any response to that?
Nothing's been provided to me from Highways to give you further information on that, no.
Any further questions for the officer? No? Thank you very much indeed. We now have the Parish Council Chairman, and he will make his comments, obviously within the 3 minutes, and it's certainly a question we can ask him if he knows of alternative routes that he can help members on the committee for. Give us an answer to that when we get to it.
Thank you, Chair. Members will have seen the comments of Elmswell Parish Council reflecting the views of the residents. I needn't go through that. My councillors are very aware of the policy arguments, particularly settlement, boundary, etc., and particularly the harm element of that that's been stressed earlier today, and the current lack of protection from off-plan proposals such as this, plucked out of the air. However, at a human level, I'm asked to reiterate concerns regarding, number one, the CCG assessment that Woolpit Health Centre can keep up with the population explosion within its catchment. It's proving at the moment that it can't. It's rather aspirational to think that it can. Number two, our ward members are fighting for a reappraisal of the primary school provision so as to avoid the daily busing of our youngest children over A14. The officer confirms that we are, on our tiny little site, going to accommodate 420 kiddies rather than the current number. They are not enough places to deal with the development, the 44% uplift in our population, which is due within the next 5 years. But the comment from County Council Highways invites the most spirited response from residents and councillors alike. In fact, it invites ridicule. As Councillor Gould is concerned, there is chronic unease about the way highways are dealing with their responsibilities with regard to applications such as this. In assessing several recent applications, Elmswell Parish Council has spent several thousands of pounds in professional transport assessment of highways capacity. We have reports. They identify the Church Road School Road junction as being over capacity. So does this applicant, and so do highways. And highways say this is not an issue because there are alternative routes from the proposed development, and it could be considered that many drivers will choose these routes to avoid queuing on School Road. Your chairman will no doubt identify from her local knowledge that they either go up through the back roads to Norton or they come down through Warren Lane. I don't have to add anything to that. We'd like you to accept the tenuous nature of this key comment and on that basis alone reject this application. In terms of the local plan, the joint local plan, the emerging plans, the established plans, the harm is demonstrable.
Questions for Mr. Dow? No? I think you sort of answered my question, which I knew the answer to, only I got the name Pakefield wrong. It's Norton, isn't it? Going up and left, and then God knows where you end up, coming back up the exhaust pipe back down to the roundabout to join the A14. And for members that don't know that, it's probably a tortuous route of about 5 miles, isn't it?
It's a dangerous and tortuous route.
And can I ask the question, to get to Warren Lane, you'd have to come over Church Road anyway, wouldn't you? You'd have to come...
Oh, yes.
Well, you'd have to come past the junction.
Yes,
Is that correct?
Sorry, the junction which is second most overloaded is the junction which is New Road, Church Road junction. You'd have to come over that one.
I'm not sure that members might automatically know that one. Have we got that? Have we got a wider picture of Elmswell as such to show these junctions? I just wonder.
I don't know if it's going to be insufficient
I mean,
detail
some
to
of us
give
have
you
been
the-
doing this long enough, know the area or have lived in the area, but I'm just, you know, not everybody always knows it. Didn't it? No, it wouldn't. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if that was close enough for you. I think people who know the
Well,
area
it
will.
will, that one, yeah. If you've got your little dot and carry one, can you identify Warren Lane? Because we've just, no, Warren Lane's sort of more.
Other side of that development.
Yeah, keep going.
No, other side of the little, down there.
Yeah.
Is that there?
Yeah. And have they started building out those houses in that area? That. No.
Not that differentiated.
No. Okay. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Dow. Thank you. We now have the applicant or agent, Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Jeff Armstrong, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Armstrong from Armstrong Rig Planning, and I've been the agent for the planning application. We have worked closely and positively with your officers, and their recommendation reflects this. Excuse me. It's important to note that this planning application has generated only one letter of objection from local residents. Also, for your information, Harrow Estates are the strategic arm for Redrow Homes. This guarantees the delivery of this site if we receive a positive resolution today. The committee report is very detailed and covers all of the relevant issues, so I don't want to repeat these again. However, there are a number of points which I would like to highlight. The comments raised by the Parish Council are all covered in the committee report. Importantly, the County Council, as Highway Authority, have raised no objection on highway grounds. I appreciate the comments you've heard from the Parish Council would suggest that there are flaws with what they have said, but we have worked very closely with them, and they have scrutinised the application at length, and they have come up with this resolution and recommendation to you as part of this committee, following long debate and discussion with our highway expert. There is also no objection on education and the education contributions, and they are agreed, and our client is happy to make those contributions. In terms of the green space to the north, this is an expanded attenuation pond already in use by Taylor Wimpey next door. It is not intended nor needed for use as a public open space. The safeguarded land for any future relief road has been included following discussions with the Parish Council. Again, it was not a requirement from the Highway Authority. The final solution for this road will be dealt with at reserve matter stage, at which time the neighbourhood plan should be more advanced. Again, the committee report notes that the plan has not advanced to any significant stage yet. In summary, this is a highly sustainable site in a highly sustainable location in one of the largest settlements in the district. The application will deliver 22 new affordable homes, public open space and play areas, with a contribution of £100,000 towards pedestrian and public transport improvements. In looking at the overall harm, your committee report clearly sets out that there is no resulting adverse harm to matters such as highways, landscape, noise, etc. I would therefore ask you to accept the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions at all? Thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to sit down. Thank you. One point that was raised by Mr. Dow, and we raised it at briefing, was with regard to the capacity in the local doctors and schools and so on, and that we know there's more development coming at Woolpit and so on. So just before we come to your good selves, if you could just amplify that point, please?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the draft joint local plan, we always have the infrastructure delivery plan that sits alongside that, as part of which we'll consult closely with the NHS Clinical Commissioning Group as well as the Education Authority. So they're aware of all planned allocations that are coming forward and can make contingency for the increase in pupil numbers and for patient numbers. In responding to consultation on this application, we have a response from the NHS who are, they state that the current surgery does not have capacity to meet the demands of the additional residents, but would take a contribution from community infrastructure levy in order to manage this. We also have comments from Suffolk County Council's Education Authority showing that, again, they would be looking to take contributions from SIL to manage the expansion of facilities in the area as a result of this application. That's in line with what's already been brought forward in the IDP, the Infrastructure Delivery Plan.
I just thought that was important to note before we sort of carry on. So we now come to our ward members, and who would like to go first, please? Councillor Mansell, thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I cannot currently support the principle of development on this site because of the strain it's going to put on the infrastructure. The site sits outside both the existing settlement boundary and the proposed settlement boundary in the draft JLP. Elmswell already has planning permission for 634 dwellings, which are at various stages in the planning process. And there is another pending application for 104 houses on School Road. The School Road site and other sites identified in the JLP claim that there is suitable for a development of a further 200 odd houses. So this development, if it goes ahead, will put further strain on the already exhausted infrastructure capacity of Elmswell and the surrounding villages, mainly highways and education. We've already mentioned the health service, which is at Woolpit and is currently over capacity. Paragraph 3.16 on page 27 of your report states that we now have an established practice for SIL funds to be used to enhance infrastructure. I'd say we're only just about beginning that, and we already know that those funds secured through CIL will always fall far short of what is actually needed to provide those infrastructure enhancements. Now, I'm going to comment mainly on the highways issues, and my colleague, Councillor Geek, is going to go into a bit more detail on the education provision, which is to provide a primary school in Woolpit. Now, I've already intimated that I think that the highways comments on this application have a few inconsistencies. We've heard from Mr. Peyton G about the single point of access issue. Suffolk County Council admit that this is not an ideal situation to have 255 houses off one single access point onto Ashfield Road. This site is north of the level crossing in Elmswell, which admittedly highways have said is not an issue, but it isn't, you know, it's something that the residents often do comment on. And highways have suggested that added traffic from this development would add a further 6 seconds delay to anyone waiting at the level crossing. But I think that the number of operations of the crossing barrier quoted by Suffolk County Council only takes into account passenger trains, no freight, and slow freight trains are the one that cause the barrier to be down for longer periods of time. And we all know that we're going to have more freight to and from Felixstowe. The main concern is the School Road Church Road junction, which we've already heard quite a lot about. It is already over capacity. They stated in the report it's at 1.05 and 1 is capacity. They start to raise alarms when I believe it gets to about 88% capacity, and we are over capacity. And they say that the main issues are pedestrian cycle safety and driver frustration caused by delays. There is a mention of improved provision for pedestrians and cyclists at that junction, but we've got no idea what they are. The alternative routes, as has already been mentioned by Parish Clerk, are not really a practical alternative to avoiding that junction. So I think that that is a little, that comment should be taken with a pinch of salt. So in terms of the pedestrian and cycling issues, We haven't got any plans for the mitigation of the School Road, Church Road junction. We don't know what they are, and yet we're told that we're going to benefit from them. And we must have the improved pedestrian and cycle routes for this and all the other developments in Elmswell, because as has already been mentioned, the infrastructure delivery plan is suggesting a new school at Woolpit, so that's approximately a third of Elmswell's primary school children will need to go across the A14 by some means to get to school in Woolpit. Now, whilst we welcome some funding towards the proposed pedestrian cycle route between the two villages, Woolpit and Elmswell, a measly £50,000 will not make it all the way. Where's the rest of the money coming from? When's it actually going to happen? If we are going to go ahead with the proposals in the IDP, we need that cycle route. It is essential. There is so much symbiosis between the two villages. Health provision is in Woolpit, the station's in Elmswell. There's a lot of movement between those two villages. If I've got time, could I also correct the officer about the closed public footpath that he talked about over the railway line? It does have a temporary closure on currently. The temporary closure, I believe, has been extended. It is never going to be reopened. Network Rail are allegedly going to be providing a new public footpath link on the north side of the railway line from the back of this development and the existing Taylor Wimpey site to an existing public footpath network at Parnell Lane near Elmswell Old Hall, which is the listed building on your diagram. We've yet to know when that's going to be happening. As far as I know, Taylor Wimpey, who are developing out the site, have done their bit, and it's up to Network Rail. They are meant to be closing that pedestrian crossing as part of their improvements to pedestrian crossings of the railway and providing us with another link to the public footpath network. So as far as I'm aware, that closed, currently temporary stopped, is never going to reopen.
Sorry. Sarah, before I come to members for questions, you raise many of the questions I raised myself, actually, and that particular footpath, or the bridge going across the railway, does the footpath still run to that closure? Because it used to go between some horrible fencing and stuff.
The footpath on the north side of the railway line, it goes through the estate, the new estate, and then it disappeared. There was a little passageway between some houses, which is going to go to the railway line. And then there, I think on the Taylor Wimpey side, there is a small section which is on their land.
But where does it go to the present?
It just goes to the, just as a dead end,
yeah,
because Network Rail are meant to be providing their other end. And the other side, into Hawkend Lane, it's still there, but it's just, as the officer will have gone, he will have gone through that, it's just between two fences and ends in a stopped crossing, yeah.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, can you confirm that when we discussed the Taylor Wimpey site some years ago, that these matters of the footpath diversion and the closure of the crossing of the railway line, etc., were all part and parcel of the discussion at that time, but no progress to be reported?
Not as far as I'm aware. Or I did hear from Taylor Wimpey that they'd done their bit as part of that condition to deal with that railway crossing, but Network Rail haven't done their bit, and getting conversations with Network Rail is, as you know, extremely difficult.
Yes?
Yeah, there is one other actually that I don't know, officers or who might answer it, possibly Councillor Mansell. Can you confirm that if you think there are no freight trains included in the numbers in the report, would you like to confirm that that Network Rail wish to double up the frequency of the Peterborough service, and also that when the work gets done at Hawley Junction, they also want to get more freight trains through this crossing as well?
Yeah, that is, as I understand it, we have a long-term promise that they will be putting hourly service Ipswich to Peterborough, no benefit of Elmswell because they probably won't stop, but it will make the barrier go down again. And we are going to have a lot more freight once they finish the loops for the Felixstowe line from the Felixstowe to the Midlands.
Just on that point, do we know when that's likely to have been completed? Or is that sort of just in the pipeline? Right, okay, thank you. Any further questions for Councillor Mansell? If not, we'll ask Councillor Geek if you would now like to present your side of the debate, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I also don't support the principle of development on this site. Councillor Mansell and Mr Dow have covered highways in detail, obviously, and I agree with their statements, but I'd like to look in more detail at primary school provision. The papers on page 28 say that there's a preschool and a primary school within a 12-minute walk, but this is entirely irrelevant because there won't be space in either of those for children living in this development. On page 21, it's explained that the children from this site won't be able to be accommodated at Elmswell Primary School, not now and not in the future. All of this development's primary school children will need to be transported outside the village. And the current plan, as you know, for further primary provision for Elmswell children is in Woolpit. Page 21 says that increased primary provision is essential and states that a new school at Woolpit, currently in the infrastructure delivery plan, will have the potential to provide for this development. But that primary school doesn't yet exist, and the planning application that would provide the land for it isn't yet determined. There's no tradition in Elmswell of busing small children to their primary school. I accept that there are in many small villages that don't have their own primary school, but Elmswell doesn't have that tradition. And there is, as we've heard, no safe walking route to Woolpit. This development's S106 contribution is only a tiny fraction of what would be needed to build one. So, of course, many parents are going to decide to drive instead, which leads to yet more congestion at that single access point to the development, to the estate, at the level crossing, which is the only railway crossing for miles around, and at that junction of School Road and Church Street. And you all know the implications of that. More stressful life, more accidents, increased air pollution, and of course the worsening of the climate emergency that this council is supposed to be tackling as a matter of urgency. In addition, if a substantial chunk of Elmswell's children, ultimately 1/3, are going to go to a primary school in a different village, what is that going to do for Elmswell's community cohesion? If this is given permission and built, we have got to provide a better option in the interests of the whole community. As the infrastructure team say, if we are looking to support more housing in Elmswell, the strategy for increased primary school capacity will need to be revisited. Just a couple of other things. Play areas and open spaces are also of relevance to families. I've got doubts about how both of those are going to work in practice. There are many problems with how they've been presented in the papers.
Councillor, you're not time constrained. Please, you have as much
sorry,
time.
I thought 3 minutes.
No,
sorry.
please.
I'll stop talking fast then.
I could see you getting redder and redder, and I thought, no.
I always do. Okay, I'll slow down because it's easier to hear me if I'm slower. Page 32, paragraph 12.4, you might like to flick to it. It's, I'll give you a bit of time for that, stated that the village has a good local bus network. I'm not sure that Mr Cameron's in the habit of trying to actually catch the bus in Elmswell because the actual service isn't good. It's sparse, it's unpunctual, worse, it's unreliable, and it's getting worse, it's declining. So if anybody was relying on that, it's not reliable. And lastly, I'd like to say something about economic benefits and sustainability. Page 27, paragraph 3.14, we get this paragraph a lot, and it talks about the employment that construction will provide. House building is a powerful stimulus for growth. It both creates and supports many jobs while it is going on. Well, yes, it does, but then so does coal mining. We can't cover our countryside with more and more development just because it creates jobs while it's being built. These houses are going to stand for a century or more. The carbon emissions caused by their building will be around for even longer. We have got to look to the future rather than concentrating on the short term. And there I will stop, as I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. Thank you. I'll make a note of that for the future.
So a question... You did trigger. Oh, yes. One thing you said, and it might not be necessarily for yourself, and I might have misheard it, and I apologise, and Daniel might be able to help us, or John. You said the school wasn't being expanded at Woolpit, but I think it is, isn't it? Haven't we passed all the houses to then give provision for the school? And the health centre, can somebody help me on that? I thought the school was expanding.
So, as I understand it, from the infrastructure development plan, the school in Elmswell will be expanding capacity to...
No, not Elmswell, Woolpit.
No, I'll do both.
Oh, sorry.
So Elmswell is expanding to accommodate 420 pupil places. Allocation LA095 in Woolpit makes provision for land to be given for the construction of a new primary school, which will deliver 500 pupil places.
And just to go on with that, the land, but has Suffolk County Council or whoever agreed to build? That's...
It's not a application yet. We haven't got a planning application.
The land has been provided.
No, the land would form part of the allocation. So when the application comes forward, the land would be provided as part of it.
Right, okay, what I'm thinking of then is that we expanded the health centre, wasn't it? That was the car parking round the back, and then there was something for the primary school round the back of that. They designed it, yeah, that's okay. Right, okay. I keep pressing the wrong button. I'm not quite sure where we are. Questions for Councillor Geek? Yes, please.
Thank you. That was my plan. Yeah. There's a couple of things actually that have been alluded to some extent or other. Is the school transport of the children from Elmswell from this development to Woolpit is that free or paid for? Second question is have you any idea, I suppose this is for either ward member, the actual cost of providing the proper linkage? I mean, I looked at £50,000 and thought, yeah, there's going to cost a lot more than that, isn't it? Is there any idea realistically of how much it would cost altogether to do the linkage across the A14 bridge?
Before you answer that, can I just ask the officers whether a cost of a school bus is relevant in planning terms? Well, I'm not sure. Is it relevant in planning terms?
Well, whether or not parents have to pay.
Yeah.
I suppose it's arguable, isn't it? I mean, if it's it makes it harder or easier to use as a mode of transport.
It's just I'm being told one thing one way, John, and I'm just checking the point for you before we get to the answer of it. But anyway, okay.
I mean, in practice, has this issue arisen before?
Right, I mean, I don't know whether Councillor Geek knows about the costing of this or whatever, so if you have the answer to that.
To my knowledge, it would depend on if it's the nearest school of the place, and it probably would be, because as we know, the other school in Elmswell, the existing one would be full. If it's over 2 or 3 miles, depending on your age, which it wouldn't be, and whether or not there's a safe walking route. And as there's no safe walking route, in that case, as far as I understand it, Suffolk County Council would pay for the buses. But that is purely the economic cost, the monetary cost. They wouldn't pay for all the other costs, such as congestion, such as carbon, such as miserable life in Woolpit.
Yeah, let's not debate. It's just a question and an answer situation. Any further questions for Councillor Geek? Can you just hold on a minute, please, Sarah? Yeah, carry on, Councillor.
Yeah, the other one was the neighbourhood plan's been mentioned at various points. The officer said it has a little material weight. I wondered if one of you could elaborate how far, how much work has actually been done on it. I think that little weight is probably a little bit unkind.
Go on, just one moment just before.
In terms of the neighbourhood plan, I'm not going to be a judge of how much work has gone into it. Ultimately, I'm sure a lot of work has gone into it. In terms of its actual weight in planning policy terms, it, as I understood, has not gone through any pre-consultation stage. Therefore, has very little almost as little as you can get weight in the context of planning. So at this stage, we really haven't given it much.
Answer to a question, please do. Yes, if you would, please. Thank you.
John asked a question about the cost of a cycle route between the two villages. Now, I haven't got anything up to date, but I do know that about 20 years ago, or just shy of 20 years ago, I was informed that just fencing and surfacing the land which has already been purchased by Sustrans down School Road, Elmswell, would be nigh on £1 million. But which seemed absolutely ludicrous to me at the time. But I have no idea what it would actually cost, but 50,000 seems like a drop in the ocean. And in terms of the neighbourhood plan, I completely agree with Mr. Pateman-G's comment. An awful lot of work has gone into it, but unfortunately, it carries negligible weight.
If I might just pick up on the cycle link. At this moment in time, your local plan, there is no neighbourhood plan provision for that linkage in policy terms. And on that basis, for example, there has been development in Woolpit where that has been discounted because there is no policy basis to secure it. There is also an argument that you have to play out, which is whether it actually is there to mitigate the burden of this development or if it's a wider benefit and betterment that needs to be dealt with by the local plan process.
Right, well, we're open to debate then. Who would like to kick off for us, please? No, go on, Councillor Humphrey.
Madam Chair, thank you. I do wait, and but I'll head off.
So do we.
Yeah, no. Just before I begin, can I just have clarification that this is a brownfield land site?
No, I think it's a field at present.
So even though it's the site of the old bacon factory, it's not classed as brownfield, is that correct? Is it? Okay, no part of it, thank you. Okay, that kills about 50% of what I was going to say, so thank you for that. It's already been argued and explained that the Suffolk Design Guide is out of date, and it's a guidance reference anyway, so guidance document gives words such as may, could, perhaps, recommend, so it's guidance. And it's interesting and it is used, but it is guidance, whereas policy is shall, will, do. Okay, so policy is the key bit here, not the guide. So policy and the MPPF and all that, it's definitely got more weight. In fact, substantial weight. If we go back to that guide though, it's interesting that even though it's out of date and it's only a guide, the developers and also the planners have taken it into consideration. And even though there's only one access road, which is one of the bones of contention, there is a loop. And the loop satisfies the guide, satisfies policy, also satisfies, interestingly, the emergency services because they don't comment on it at all. And it was designed with them in mind. So it sort of ticks all the boxes, really, this estate and the layout. And also there's precedent been set, and Chiltern Leys is a classic example where we've already allowed it in other places. So I think the access and the single point access is not an arguable point, personally. When we go back to policy, I can't find anything, and I've read through this time and time again now, that you can reject this application on in policy. One of the things, though, to give a little bit of balance to it, that stands out for me is the educational need and lack of provision. And that is pretty critical. And I think on page 2 of the response from Suffolk County Council, it talks about the requirements, and it talks about that school you're on about, Chair. It says that local catchment areas for Elmswell, Ixworth Free School and Thurston Community College, they have no surplus places in any of those schools in the catchment area. The strategy at the secondary school level is to expand Thurston Community College. The earlier strategy at the primary school level, responding to previous planning applications, is to expand the existing Elmswell Community Primary School by 105 places from the existing 315 to 420. But the important bit is, however, this expansion project will not be able to deal with the pupils arising from this proposed development. And this is the bit that really sticks with me, that there is no provision for education. And any provision for education will come way after this planning permission and development. doesn't sit right. We could go down the NHS route as well, where they're already talking about we need SIL to provide the services that are required for Elmswell currently and the local area and this extended planning application. So there are definitely not enough places for education, and there are certainly not enough provisions for care. They're two really important aspects. And all of the policy, and there's lots of things that say we should go for this and we should accept this and we should allow this to be developed. There's the other side of it. There's also policy, I think, that we need to provide education and we need to provide care for the communities. And we can't do that currently, having read this document in full, to my belief, unless anybody could argue against that point.
Unless I'm going to be corrected by the case officer, when I look at the school provision side of this argument, one question that hasn't been asked or answered is what is the current ratios of catchment in respect of the schools in question. So ultimately there's capacity overall to serve the area, and whether or not that means that any children will be effectively squashed out and have to find a longer distance to travel to get to the next nearest school, which the county would have to pay for. But ultimately, I don't know what children are coming into Elmswell and what children are going into Woolpit on the basis of how this development may change those ratios over the next 5-year period. I don't have that detail. I don't think we do have that detail. Our assumption, because the Education Authority is the Education Authority, is that they have made considerations around that and looked at the next 5-10 years in respect of education provision in this area. But unfortunately, this is where, as a local planning authority, we start stepping on the toes of the Education Authority to tell them how to do their job or not. So I'm conscious about that. In terms of the NHS and the interesting relationship the planning has with them, ultimately we have a community infrastructure regime which gathers money to react to the need as opposed to plan for the need. And because of that, when we had the 106 provisions as one way forward previously, where we had to identify how this development affects and therefore contribute towards, it works the other way around, that it now needs the need to be identified to then put the money into it. So it's not the emphasis for developers to solve all these problems. They are providing the money that we've said for them to provide. It's then for the authorities to plug the gaps as they come forward. So it's kind of reverse thinking, and I appreciate that causes significant problems for the debate that councillors need to have. The other problem here we've got with the NHS is quite an interesting, complicated one, where we actually have a local centre in Woolpit. I dealt with the application adjacent to that site, which was for the expansion of the car park, so that because the only reason that centre can expand is by giving it a car park elsewhere, so it can expand on the existing car park. So that effectively, hopefully, makes everything a little bit more sustainable because there's a local centre. Since that application, the NHS have turned around to us and said, well, if that never goes ahead, we'll go back to the original plan, which is have a super hub in Bury. So their aims don't, they will be a provision, it's just whether that's convenient and where it is. However, we diverse perhaps a little bit there. We don't have all the answers. Is ultimately the answer in respect of some parts of these infrastructure that are reliant on the duties of other authorities to provide on the basis of the need that comes forward.
Did you want to come back,
Yeah, thank you for that. I understand this is outline, isn't it? Yeah, this is outline anyway. So, yeah, I've got it, and thank you for your comments.
Councillor Matheson, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, as I read through this application, I became a little bit uneasy about it, and I thought, well, yeah, so what would be reasons to refuse it? And so I went back through it again, and I noted specifically that the individual concerns and not too happies and so forth from the different consultees. And let me just take you through them very quickly. Right. This is in order they are in the papers. We firstly find that the travel will be by bus for primary education. Yes, we touched on that. That's on page 17. Lower down on page 17, something we haven't mentioned, but we note that piling is, this is under Environment Agency, we note that piling is a proposed foundation solution for part of the site. Deep foundations have potential to impact on groundwater resources. It's another bit of a concern being expressed there. And they want some, we'll skip the drainage. And then over the page, on page 18, highways, as we've discussed, the problems of the overcapacity of the junction with School Road and Church Road. And also in that particular context there's the pedestrians and cyclists would benefit from improvements, but there's no actual, so there's a safety issue there which NPPF has things to say about, of course, and I've cycled through that junction myself a number of times. And then turning down the page, the bottom of the page, access and internal layout. Yeah, as we've heard again, Councillor Humphreys and so on, the single access is not ideal but allowable. It's not good, but it's allowable. And then over a little bit more, we come to planning policy, page 20, and they say that the proposal is not encouraged or supported. And there are page 74, more detail on that. And then 2 to go, there is the very large number of applications that are already approved, which is on page 20 and 21 and has been discussed. And then finally, and I skipped the health service one because I know they'll get the money somehow or other, we find on page 23, Anglian Water are saying that the development would lead to an unacceptable risk of flooding downstream, which again raises another lot of concerns. Now, I think all of those 7 things, one way and another, actually address the principle of development, which is what we're talking about today. So, given all of those, it might take some time to assemble them into reasons for refusal, but I'm certainly not going to be putting my hand up in approval of this.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Many of the points I highlighted myself.
The purpose of planning is to promote development and find solutions. So ultimately, each one of those issues, most consultees will start, the biggest problem will be this. To resolve that problem, we will ask for this. And they have asked for conditions, or they have asked for changes in the development which have been taken into account or conditioned for as part of the recommendation before members. But whether you think that's sufficient is your judgment to make. There is something else, but I'll think about that in a minute.
Does anyone else wish to speak? No? No one else wants to say anything? No.
Yes, we would need to, I think, yes.
If we can just have...
Tell members that you're going out with us, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. if we could possibly just have an adjournment, and I'll go with the legal officer and senior planner just for a debate on an issue that's sprung to mind. So the meeting will just be suspended for a short time. Do you want the planning? We're ready to resume now, and thank you very much for your patience. I think the best thing is for John to explain where we might go on this one now, please. Thank you, John.
Thank you. We stepped outside to discuss the conversations that have happened so far and the evidence brought forward by the ward members. Looking at the highways comments and looking at what is before us in terms of those comments, we feel that we would like to withdraw this application at this stage, to defer it, so that we can go over those matters again to ensure that we can provide members with better clarity and detail in respect of the highways position, and equally provide further details on the improvements that this application would result in around those highway matters. And so I do add an apology to this for not making sure that that was the case for you today. And I suspect there will be repercussions on that point, but we have thought it would be in the best interests for the decision, whatever decision that might be, to ensure that it is robust and without challenge, for us to do that and come back to you with clearer details on the highway matters.
So thank you for that, John. On that basis, I'm happy to propose that from the chair, and thank you, Councillor Matheson. That's very helpful indeed. So on that, with regard to what John has just told us, all those in favour of a deferral at this point, and it will come back to this committee.
1, 2, that's unanimous.
We are unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you. Are there any further...
no site inspections.
No site inspections planned, so the meeting is now closed. Thank you very much.